Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Cole Harrington, and I've been running Arctic hauls for 11 years. That's long enough to know the Dalton Highway doesn't forgive mistakes, and winter up here isn't a season, it's a state of mind. When people ask what it's like driving through polar night, I tell them to imagine being swallowed whole. No sun for weeks. Just this endless, crushing dark that presses against your windshield like something alive. It was late January when I picked up the load in Fairbanks. Drilling equipment headed for Dead Horse. Standard run, 14 hours if the weather held, which it never does. The dispatcher, Ron Kellerman, had been roading trucks since before I was born. He gave me the usual rundown while I signed the manifest. Road conditions fair to poor. Temperatures hovering around -40. Wind chill taking it down past 60 below. "You fueled up?" Ron asked, not looking up from his clipboard. "Topped off an hour ago. Survival kit, extra blankets, flares, satellite phone." "Ron, this isn't my first time." He looked at me then, and I saw something flicker across his face. Concern, maybe. Or just the exhaustion that comes from watching drivers head north into the blackness year after year. "Yeah, well, Weather Service is calling for whiteout conditions north of Coldfoot. Supposed to hit around midnight. You sure you don't want to wait it out till morning?" I checked my watch. It was already past 2 in the afternoon, which meant it had been dark for hours and would stay that way until March. "I'll be through the pass before it hits. I know the road." Ron nodded slowly, like he'd heard that line before. Probably had. He handed me the paperwork and turned back to his radio without another word. I climbed into the cab, fired up the engine, and let it idle for a few minutes while the heater kicked in. The thermometer on my dashboard read -38. Outside, the air was so cold it felt like broken glass in your lungs. Fairbanks disappeared behind me within minutes, swallowed by the kind of darkness you don't get anywhere else. No streetlights, no houses. Just the narrow tunnel of my headlights cutting through the black, illuminating nothing but snow-packed asphalt and the occasional reflective mile marker. The truck's cabin was warm, almost too warm, but I kept the heat cranked because the cold up here isn't something you take chances with. Your fuel can gel, your tires can crack, your engine can seize, and if you break down out here in the middle of polar night, you're not waiting for a tow truck. You're waiting to see if you freeze to death before someone notices you're missing. The first hour was uneventful. I passed a couple of southbound trucks, their lights blooming briefly in the darkness before vanishing behind me. The road was in decent shape, hard-packed snow with minimal ice. My CB radio crackled occasionally with static and distant chatter, drivers checking in with each other, talking about weather, fuel stops, engine trouble. It's a lifeline up here, that radio, a reminder that you're not completely alone, even when it feels like you are. Around mile marker 75, I passed through the village of Livengood, or what's left of it. A handful of buildings, most of them dark, a couple of dim lights glowing in windows like dying embers, nobody outside. Nobody ever is in January. I kept rolling, watching the odometer tick upward, watching the fuel gauge, watching the temperature readout drop another degree. That's when I noticed the aurora. It started as a faint greenish glow on the horizon, rippling like a curtain caught in a breeze. Then it spread, arcing across the entire sky in waves of pale green and violet. Beautiful, in a way that makes you feel small. I've seen the northern lights 1,000 times, but they still get to me. There's something about them that doesn't feel quite natural, like the sky is showing you something it's not supposed to. I rolled down the window just a crack, letting the cold air rush in, sharp and clean. The aurora pulsed overhead, silent and strange. For a moment, I forgot about the road, forgot about the schedule, forgot about the whiteout forecast. I just watched. Then the CB crackled. "Northbound traffic, this is Unit 79er. Anyone out there?" I grabbed the handset. "This is northbound Unit 42, go ahead 79er. Static. Then a voice, faint and distorted. "You coming up on the Yukon River crossing?" "About an hour out. Why, what's up?" More static. The voice came back, clearer this time. "Just, be careful up there. Road's been weird tonight." I frowned. Weird how? No response. Just the hiss of empty air. I waited, watching the radio, but the voice didn't come back. I keyed the mic again. 79er, you still there?" Nothing. I hung the handset back on the clip and kept driving. Weird wasn't a word you wanted to hear on the Dalton, but it also wasn't unusual. Guys got spooked out here. The darkness, the isolation, the cold. It messed with your head if you let it. I'd heard stories, drivers seeing things that weren't there, lights in the distance that never got closer, voices on the radio that shouldn't exist. I didn't put much stock in it. The mind plays tricks when you're tired and alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The aurora was brighter now, casting a pale, sickly glow over the snow. The road ahead looked different somehow, flatter, smoother, like the texture had been erased. I slowed down just a little and tightened my grip on the wheel. My headlights swept across the mile marker, 98. I made a mental note. Another 70 miles to Coldfoot, where I could stop for fuel and coffee and a few minutes of human contact before pushing on to Deadhorse. That's when I saw the first sign. It was small, easy to miss. A wooden post on the side of the road, half buried in snow, with a hand-painted arrow pointing west. No words, no indication of what it was marking. Just an arrow. I'd driven this road more times than I could count, and I'd never seen that sign before. I told myself it was nothing. Someone's hunting trail, maybe, or an old access road to a mining camp. The Dalton was littered with remnants of abandoned projects, forgotten infrastructure, the bones of failed ventures. But something about that arrow bothered me. It looked fresh. The paint wasn't faded, the wood wasn't rotted. I kept driving. The temperature kept dropping. -42, -45. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the cold was pressing in from all sides. The aurora twisted overhead, no longer beautiful, just unsettling. And then the wind picked up. It started as a low moan, barely audible over the rumble of the engine. Then it grew, building into a sustained howl that shook the cab. Snow began to lift off the ground, swirling in dense clouds that blurred the road ahead. I could still see, but just barely. The visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet, then 30, then less. Whiteout. I eased off the gas, slowing to a crawl. My headlights were useless now, just reflecting back at me in a wall of white. I couldn't see the road, couldn't see the mile markers, couldn't see anything. All I could do was keep the wheel steady and hope I was still on the pavement. That's when I felt it. A change, subtle, but unmistakable. The road beneath me felt wrong, too smooth, too flat, like I drifted onto something that wasn't asphalt. I hit the brakes gently, bringing the truck to a stop, and sat there in the roaring silence listening to the wind scream. The CB crackled again. "Northbound, 42. I grabbed the handset. "This is 42. Who's calling?" Static, then faint and distorted. "Turn around." My blood went cold. "Say again?" "Turn around, before it's too late." The voice cut out. I stared at the radio, my heart pounding. The whiteout raged outside, hammering the truck, shaking the mirrors. I couldn't see anything, couldn't orient myself. For all I knew, I was sitting in the middle of the road, or worse, off it entirely. I shifted into reverse, inching backward, trying to feel for the pavement. The tires crunched over something, snow or gravel, I couldn't tell. Then the truck lurched, tilting slightly to the left. I froze, hands locked on the wheel. I was off the road, not by much, maybe a foot or two, but enough. Enough that if I wasn't careful, I could slide into the ditch and that would be it. No cell signal out here. Satellite phone in the sleeper. But if the truck was stuck, I'd be burning fuel to stay warm, and fuel doesn't last forever. I took a breath, steadied myself, and eased forward. The tires spun for a second, then caught. The truck lurched back onto solid ground. I exhaled, slow and controlled, and kept moving, barely touching the gas, feeling my way through the storm. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the whiteout stopped. The wind died, the snow settled, the air cleared. I could see again, headlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. I checked my mirrors, nothing behind me but empty highway and swirling snow. I checked the odometer. I'd only moved a quarter mile, maybe less. I looked at the mile marker ahead, the same one I'd passed 10 minutes ago. I stared at it, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. That wasn't possible. I'd been moving forward the entire time. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't looped back. But there it was, mile marker 98, exactly where I'd seen it before. I grabbed the CB. "Anyone on this channel? This is Unit 42. Can anyone hear me?" Static. No response. I tried again. "Ron, if you're listening, this is Cole. I'm north of Livengood, and something's not right. Please respond." Nothing. The aurora pulsed overhead, brighter now, casting long shadows across the snow. I sat there, engine idling, staring at that mile marker. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, from something else. I put the truck in gear and started driving again, faster this time, pushing past the marker, past the spot where I'd seen the arrow, past the place where the whiteout had hit. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just drove, counting the mile markers as they passed, making sure they were going up and not repeating. The road stretched ahead, straight and empty. The wind had died completely. The aurora faded, leaving only the black sky and the pale glow of starlight. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. And that's when I saw the shack. It appeared on the left side of the road, barely visible in the darkness, a small wooden structure maybe 10 feet by 10 feet with a single window and a door. No lights inside, no smoke from the chimney, just a building. Sitting there in the middle of nowhere where no building should be. I slowed down, staring at it. I'd driven this road dozens of times. There was no shack at mile 115. There were no structures at all between Livengood and Coldfoot except for the occasional maintenance shed, and those were marked on the map. This wasn't on any map. I pulled over, letting the truck idle, and grabbed my flashlight. The temperature outside was brutal, -47, but I needed to see, needed to understand what I was looking at. I climbed out of the cab, boots crunching on the frozen ground, and walked toward the shack. The wind had picked up again, not a whiteout, just a steady, biting breeze that cut through my layers like they weren't even there. My breath hung in the air, crystallizing instantly. The flashlight beam swept across the shack's exterior. Old wood, weathered but not rotten, no snow on the roof, which was strange. Everything up here gets buried in snow. But the roof was clear, like someone had brushed it off recently. I stepped closer. The door was shut. No handle, just a simple latch. The window was dark, covered in frost so thick I couldn't see inside. I hesitated, hand hovering over the latch. Every instinct told me to get back in the truck and keep driving. But curiosity, or maybe something else, pulled me forward. I lifted the latch. The door swung open. Inside, the shack was empty. No furniture, no supplies, just bare wooden walls and a dirt floor. But it was warm. Not heated, not like there was a stove or heater running, but warm. The air inside felt at least 20 degrees warmer than outside, which made no sense. I stepped inside, shining my light around, looking for vents, cracks, anything that might explain it. Nothing. The floor was undisturbed, no footprints, no marks. The walls were bare except for a single word carved into the wood near the back corner. I moved closer, angling the light. Northbound. My stomach turned. That was the word from the CB. The voice that had warned me to turn around. I backed out of the shack, heart racing, and pulled the door shut. The latch clicked into place. I stood there for a moment, staring at the building, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Then I turned and walked back to the truck. I climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking again. I grabbed the CB handset. Anyone on this frequency, this is Unit 42. I'm at mile 115, and I need confirmation. Is there a structure on the west side of the road at this location? Static. I tried again. Ron, if you can hear me, I need you to check the maps. Mile 115 west side. Is there anything there? No response. I hung up the handset and stared at the road ahead. The shack sat in my side mirror, dark and motionless. I put the truck in gear and started driving, watching the mirror as the building shrank behind me. I didn't take my eyes off it until it disappeared completely. Mile marker 116, 117, 118. The road was straight and empty. No other traffic. No lights in the distance. Just the endless black and the faint glow of the aurora returning to the sky. I kept the speed steady, hands tight on the wheel, mind racing. That's when the CB crackled again. 4-2, this is 7-9er. You still out there? I grabbed the mic. 7-9er, yeah, I'm here. Where are you? Just crossed the Yukon. You coming up behind me? I checked my GPS. The Yukon River crossing was at mile 56. I was at mile 120. Negative, I'm way past you. I'm north of... The signal cut out. I waited, but it didn't come back. I hung up the mic and kept driving, trying to piece together what was happening. The GPS said mile 120. The odometer agreed. But 7-9er said he was at mile 56, which meant either he was way behind me or I wasn't where I thought I was. I looked at the next mile marker as it passed. 121. Then 122. The numbers were going up. Everything seemed normal. But something deep in my gut told me it wasn't. The wind picked up again, harder this time. Snow began to swirl across the road, not a full whiteout but enough to reduce visibility. I slowed down, leaning forward, squinting through the windshield. The headlights barely penetrated the blowing snow, and then I saw it. Another mile marker. But this one was different. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded slightly before coming to a stop. I stared at the marker, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. I'd been at mile 122 10 seconds ago. I'd been moving forward. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't looped back. But there it was. Mile marker 98. I grabbed the handset. Anyone on this frequency, this is an emergency. I'm at mile marker 98 and I've been here before. Something is wrong with the road. Does anyone copy? Static. I tried again, voice rising. Someone answer me, please, I need help. Nothing. I sat there staring at the marker, my breath fogging the windshield. The temperature inside the cab was dropping. I checked the heater. It was running, but the warmth was fading, like the cold outside was seeping in through the walls. I turned the heat up to max, but it didn't help. The aurora flared overhead, brighter than before, casting the snow in shades of green and purple. And in that light I saw something. A figure, standing on the side of the road, maybe 50 feet ahead, motionless, facing the truck. My heart stopped. I leaned forward, trying to make out details. It looked like a person, but I couldn't tell. The aurora light made everything distorted, shadows stretching and bending in unnatural ways. I flashed my high beams. The figure didn't move. I grabbed my flashlight and rolled down the window, shining the beam toward the figure. It was a person, or something shaped like a person. Tall, wearing dark clothing, hood pulled up, but the posture was wrong. Too stiff, too still. I honked the horn. The sound echoed through the emptiness, sharp and jarring. The figure didn't react. I sat there, frozen, unsure what to do. Every instinct screamed at me to drive, to get past it, to not stop. But I couldn't look away, couldn't move. The figure just stood there, silent and unmoving, bathed in the green light of the aurora. Then, slowly, it raised one arm, pointing. Not at me. Behind me. I turned, looking out the back window. The road behind me was empty. No lights, no movement. Just the pale glow of the snow and the dark sky. I turned back to the figure. It was gone. I stared at the spot where it had been, my pulse hammering in my ears. The road was empty. No footprints in the snow. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I rolled up the window, locked the door, and sat there, breathing hard. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. The temperature gauge on the dash read -53, colder than it had been all night. I put the truck in gear and started driving. Slowly at first, then faster. I didn't look back, didn't stop. I just drove, past the mile marker, past the spot where the figure had been, past the place where the shack should have been but wasn't anymore. The road stretched ahead, endless and black. The aurora pulsed overhead, silent and strange. And somewhere in the distance, faint but growing louder, I heard the wind begin to howl. I drove for what felt like hours. The odometer kept ticking. The mile markers kept passing, but nothing looked right. The road was the same. The snow was the same. The aurora overhead was the same. It was like I was stuck in a photograph, moving forward but never getting anywhere. Mile 98 appeared again. Then again. And again. I stopped counting after the 5th time. My fuel gauge was dropping, not fast, but enough to notice. I'd burned a quarter tank since leaving Fairbanks, which should have taken me past Coldfoot by now. But I wasn't at Coldfoot, I wasn't anywhere. The CB stayed silent. No static, no voices, just dead air. I tried every channel, called out on each one, but nobody answered. It was like the radio had stopped working, or like there was nobody left to hear me. The temperature kept dropping. -55, -58. The cold was seeping into the cab despite the heater running full blast. I pulled a blanket from the sleeper and wrapped it around my shoulders, but it didn't help. My fingers were numb. My breath came out in clouds. That's when I noticed the ice. It was forming on the inside of the windshield, creeping inward from the edges in intricate patterns. Frost flowers, they call them. Beautiful in any other context. Terrifying when they start forming inside your cab. I cranked the defroster, but the ice kept spreading. Within minutes, my view was half obscured. The world outside reduced to a narrow tunnel of visibility. I scraped at it with my glove, but it just grew back, faster than I could clear it. I slowed to a crawl, leaning to the side to see through the clearest part of the windshield. The road ahead was barely visible, just a faint gray line between walls of snow. And then I saw them. Tracks. Tire tracks, fresh, cutting across the road and disappearing into the snowbank on the right side. I stopped, staring at them. They were wide, heavy-duty truck tires, the same size as mine. I looked at my side mirror. My own tracks stretched behind me, clear and unbroken. I looked ahead. The other tracks crossed the road from left to right, like someone had veered off and driven into the snow. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The cold hit me like a wall, so intense it stole my breath. I pulled my hood tight and walked toward the tracks, following them with the flashlight beam. They led directly into the snowbank, deep ruts carved into the frozen surface. I followed them for maybe 20 feet, then stopped. The tracks ended. Not at a truck, not at a ditch, just ended. Like the vehicle had driven into the snow and vanished. I stood there staring, trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed something else. Footprints. Small, human-sized, leading away from the end of the tire tracks. They were deep, like someone had been running. I followed them with my light, tracking them across the snow toward the tree line. They stopped at the edge of the trees. No entry point. No continuation. Just stopped. I backed away, my heart pounding, and returned to the truck. I climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were so cold I could barely feel them. I turned the heater up again, even though I knew it wasn't helping. That's when I saw it in my side mirror, the shack. It was back. Same location, same appearance, sitting on the left side of the road where it had been before. But I'd driven past this spot 6 times. It hadn't been there. I stared at it, my breath fogging the mirror. The door was open now. Just a crack, but enough to see darkness inside. And as I watched, the door moved, not from the wind. It moved deliberately, slowly, like something was pushing it open from the inside. I didn't wait. I put the truck in gear and hit the gas, tires spinning briefly before catching. The truck lurched forward, and I drove, faster than I should have in these conditions. But I didn't care. I needed to get away from that shack, away from those tracks, away from whatever was happening. The road blurred past. Mile markers flashed by, too fast to read. The aurora overhead twisted and writhed, no longer beautiful, just alien. Wrong. The wind screamed, and the snow swirled, and the ice on my windshield grew thicker. Then I saw the lights. 2 points of white, far ahead, barely visible through the snow. Another truck heading south, toward me. I flashed my high beams, desperate for contact, for confirmation that I wasn't alone out here. The lights grew brighter, closer. I could make out the shape now, a big rig, same model as mine. It was moving fast, too fast for these conditions. I eased off the gas, pulling to the right to give it room. The truck roared past me, horn blaring. I caught a glimpse of the driver, hood up, face hidden, and on the side of the trailer, painted in faded letters, Harrington Freight. My company. My truck. I watched in the mirror as it disappeared behind me, the taillights fading into the snow. My hands were frozen on the wheel. My mind was spinning. That wasn't possible. I was driving my truck. There was only one unit out here, unless I'd been seeing myself. Seeing the loop from the outside. I slammed on the brakes, bringing the truck to a stop. I sat there, engine idling, staring at the empty road ahead. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. The temperature gauge read -61. That's when the CB crackled. 4-2, this is 7-9er. I'm at mile 98, you nearby? I grabbed the mic, my voice hoarse. 7-9er. Where are you coming from? South. Just left Coldfoot. Why? What's your position right now? Mile 98, like I said. You okay, 4-2? I looked at the mile marker ahead, mile 98. 7-9er. I'm at the same marker. I'm looking at it right now. Silence, then. That's not possible. I'm here. I'm looking at the road. You're not here. My stomach dropped. 7-9er. I need you to describe what you see. Snow. Road, aurora. Nothing else. No trucks. I stared at the CB, my mind racing. 7-9er, do you see a shack? Small building, west side of the road? A long pause, then, negative, no structures, just empty road. I hung up the mic and sat there, trembling. The heater was making a strange noise now, a rattling that hadn't been there before. The frost on the windshield had spread to cover almost the entire surface. I could barely see, and then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it. Footsteps, outside the truck, crunching through the snow, slow, deliberate, circling the cab. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped at the driver's side door. I turned my head slowly, looking at the window. The frost was too thick to see through, but I could make out a shape. A shadow, standing just outside. A hand pressed against the glass. Fingers spread wide, leaving marks in the frost. Then a voice, muffled and distant. Northbound. The same word from the CB. The same word carved in the shack. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The hand slid down the glass, leaving smeared trails in the frost, then disappeared. The footsteps resumed, moving around the front of the truck, passing the passenger side, circling back to the rear. Then they stopped. I waited, listening. The wind howled. The aurora flared. But the footsteps didn't return. I counted to 60, slow and controlled, then grabbed my flashlight and the satellite phone from the sleeper. I climbed into the passenger seat, unlocked the door, and opened it just a crack. The cold rushed in, brutal and immediate. I shined the light outside. The snow around the truck was undisturbed. No footprints, no marks, nothing. I closed the door, locked it, and climbed back into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I powered it on, waiting for the signal. 1 bar, then 2. I dialed Ron's number. It rang, once, twice, then connected. Cole? Ron's voice, clear as day. Ron, I'm in trouble. Something's wrong with the road. I keep seeing the same mile marker. I need help. Cole, slow down. What's your position? Mile 98. I've been here for hours. I can't get past it. Silence, then. Cole, that's not possible. GPS shows you at mile 167. I looked at the mile marker outside. 98. Ron, I'm looking at it right now. It says 98. Cole, your tracker shows you just south of Coldfoot. You're almost there. You should be seeing lights by now. I stared at the phone, my mind spinning. Ron, there are no lights. There's nothing. Just snow and dark. Another pause. Cole, I need you to pull over and check your equipment. Your GPS might be faulty, but you need to get to Coldfoot. Your fuel is low. I know my fuel is low. I've been trying to get there. Cole, you're 15 miles out. Just keep driving. You'll see the lights soon. He hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone. 15 miles, mile 167. But the marker outside said 98. I started the engine and drove. I didn't look at the mile markers. Didn't check the mirrors. I just focused on the road ahead, on the narrow tunnel of visibility through the frosted windshield, and drove. And then, slowly, gradually, I saw them. Lights. Faint at first, just a glow on the horizon, then brighter, sharper. The lights of Coldfoot trucks stop, exactly where they should be. I pulled into the lot, killed the engine, and sat there, shaking. The other trucks were parked in neat rows, their cabs dark. The truck stop windows glowed warm and yellow. Everything looked normal, real. I climbed out, legs unsteady, and walked toward the building. The door opened with a cheerful jingle. Warm air washed over me, almost painful after hours in the cold. A woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Rough night?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Coffee's fresh. Help yourself." I poured a cup, hands still trembling, and sat at a table near the window. Outside, my truck sat in the parking lot covered in frost. I stared at it, trying to process what had happened. Then I saw the driver from the other truck, the one that had passed me on the road. He was sitting at the far end of the room, hood still up, face still hidden. He was drinking coffee, completely still. I stood up, walked over. "Hey, were you on the Dalton tonight?" He didn't respond. "Hey," I said again, louder. "I saw you out there. You passed me." Slowly, he turned his head. The hood fell back. It was me. My face, my eyes, staring back at me. I stumbled backward, knocking over my coffee. The woman behind the counter looked up, concerned. "You okay?" I turned back to the table. It was empty. The man was gone. The coffee cup was gone, like he'd never been there. "Did you see?" I started, but the words died in my throat. The woman frowned. "See what, honey?" I shook my head, backing toward the door. "Nothing. I'm fine." I left the truck stop, climbed back into my cab, and locked the doors. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, making sure it was real, making sure it was just me. I didn't sleep that night. I just waited for dawn, which I knew wouldn't come. I made it to Dead Horse 3 days later. The run should have taken 14 hours. It took me 72. I don't remember most of it, just driving, stopping, driving again. The whiteouts came and went. The road stretched on. The aurora danced overhead. When I finally delivered the load, the receiving clerk looked at his clipboard and frowned. "You're late." "I know. 3 days late. You have any idea how much this cost us?" I didn't answer. I just handed him the paperwork and walked back to my truck. Ron called an hour later, his voice tight with frustration. "Cole, what the hell happened out there?" "I got lost." "Lost? You've been running that road for 11 years. How do you get lost?" I didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense. "Your GPS log doesn't match your timeline," Ron continued. "According to the tracker, you made the trip in standard time. But you're 3 days late. It doesn't add up." "I know." "Cole, I need more than that. I need an explanation." I closed my eyes, leaning back against the seat. "I don't have one." He sighed. "Look, take a few days off. Get some sleep. We'll talk when you're back." He hung up. I sat there, staring at the empty parking lot. The sky was still dark. It would stay dark for another month. I thought about the shack, the figure, the footsteps, the face in the truck stop. None of it made sense. None of it could be explained. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. I drove south the next morning, taking my time, stopping every few hours, keeping the CB on, listening to other drivers' voices. Real voices. Human voices. Proof that I wasn't alone. When I reached Fairbanks, I turned in my keys. Ron didn't argue. He just nodded, like he'd seen this before. "You sure?" "I'm sure." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Something else. Anything else." He shook my hand. "Take care of yourself, Cole." I left the office and walked out into the parking lot. The aurora was starting to show, faint green ribbons on the horizon. I stood there watching it, feeling the cold seep into my bones. I never found out what happened on that road. Never got an explanation for the loop, the shack, the figure. The GPS log showed a normal run. The fuel consumption matched the distance. On paper, everything checked out. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know that somewhere north of Livengood, at mile marker 98, there's a shack that shouldn't exist. And if you ever find yourself out there, in the blackness, in the cold, and you see it, don't stop, don't go inside, and whatever you do, don't look in the mirror. Because you might not like what looks back. My name is Reed Walker, and I've been hauling freight through the Yukon Territory for the better part of 16 winters. That's long enough to know that the silence up here isn't really silence at all. It's something else, something that presses against your eardrums and makes you hyper-aware of every small sound. The tick of cooling metal, the whisper of wind through a crack in the door seal, your own heartbeat, amplified in the darkness until it sounds like distant thunder. February is the worst month. The coldest, the darkest, the most unforgiving. The kind of month where your breath freezes in your lungs and the metal of your door handle can take the skin off your palm if you're not wearing gloves. The kind of month where the sun barely creeps above the horizon for a few hours before giving up and sinking back down, leaving you with 20 hours of absolute darkness. And in that darkness, in that cold, things change. The roads shift, landmarks disappear, and sounds travel in ways they shouldn't. It was February 18th when I got the call from dispatch. A priority load heading from Whitehorse to Dawson City, medical supplies and emergency equipment for the hospital up there. The highway had been closed for 3 days due to a massive storm system that had parked itself over the region, but it had finally cleared enough for travel. They needed someone experienced, someone who knew the Klondike Highway in winter, someone who wouldn't panic when things got rough. That someone was me. I picked up the load at the distribution center just after noon, which meant I had maybe 3 hours of weak, gray daylight before the darkness swallowed everything. The temperature was sitting at -43 Celsius, and the weather forecast was calling for another system to move in overnight. Light snow, maybe some wind. Nothing I hadn't driven through 100 times before, but there was something in the dispatcher's voice, a hesitation, a careful choice of words that made me pause. "You sure about this, Reed?" she asked. Her name was Margaret, and she'd been routing trucks in the territory for 30 years. She knew the roads as well as I did, knew the risks, knew when to hold back and when to send someone out. "I'm sure," I said, signing the manifest. "Hospital needs this stuff. Can't wait another 3 days for the weather to clear completely." She nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on me a beat too long. "Radio's been acting up the last few days, lots of static, interference. Some of the drivers have been reporting strange transmissions." Strange how? She shrugged, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Just keep your radio on, check in every hour. And if you need to pull over and wait it out, do it. Don't push your luck." I told her I wouldn't, but we both knew I was lying. The first hour out of Whitehorse was uneventful. The highway was in decent shape, the snowplows had done their job, and the ice wasn't too bad yet. I kept the speed moderate, around 60 kilometers per hour, watching the road, watching the mirrors, watching the sky. The light was already fading, that weak February sun giving up early, and by the time I passed the turnoff for CarMax, it was full dark. That's when the temperature started to drop. I watched the gauge on my dashboard tick downward. -45, -48, -51. The kind of cold that makes the air itself feel brittle, like it might shatter if you moved through it too fast. I cranked the heater up, but the warmth felt thin, inadequate, like it was barely holding back the cold pressing in from outside. The road ahead was a narrow tunnel of visibility, my headlights cutting through the darkness and illuminating maybe 50 meters of snow-packed asphalt before everything dissolved into black. No other vehicles, no lights from distant houses, just the road and the trees and the enormous, suffocating darkness of the Yukon winter. I turned on the CB radio, more for the comfort of having another voice in the cab than for any practical reason. The static was immediate and loud, a harsh crackling that filled the space around me. I adjusted the squelch, trying to find a clear channel, but every frequency was the same. White noise, punctuated by brief moments of something that might have been voices but were too distorted to make out. Then, cutting through the static, clear as a bell. Northbound. I grabbed the mic. "This is northbound Unit 47, go ahead." Silence. Just the crackle and hiss of dead air. I tried again. "Unit 47 requesting identification. Who's calling?" Nothing. I hung up the mic and kept driving, telling myself it was just interference, just some weird atmospheric phenomenon that happens in extreme cold. Radio waves bounce differently when the air is this dense, this frozen. Signals get trapped and reflected, creating echoes and phantom transmissions. It was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice had been directed at me, that someone, somewhere, was calling out specifically to me. The kilometers ticked by slowly. I passed through the tiny settlement of Pelly Crossing, just a handful of buildings clustered around the highway, all dark and shuttered against the cold. No signs of life, no smoke from chimneys. Just empty structures and the pale glow of a single streetlight illuminating falling snow. The snow had started about 20 minutes earlier, light at first, just a few flakes drifting down through the headlight beams. But it was getting heavier now. Thicker, the flakes larger and wetter despite the temperature. I could feel the road changing beneath me, the texture shifting from hard-packed snow to something slicker, more treacherous. Black ice, the most dangerous thing you can encounter on a winter highway. A thin, transparent layer of ice that forms on the road surface, invisible in the dark, impossible to see until your tires are already sliding across it. I eased off the gas, slowing down to 40 kilometers per hour, then 30, feeling for grip, testing the road with tiny adjustments to the steering wheel. The truck responded normally, the tires held, but I could feel it under there, that slickness, that lack of traction. One wrong move and I'd be in the ditch. That's when I heard it again. Northbound. Same voice, same clarity. But this time there was something else underneath it. A texture, a quality I couldn't quite identify. It sounded wrong. Like a human voice being played through a speaker that wasn't quite calibrated correctly. The pitch was off, the rhythm was off, the way the word hung in the air was off. I didn't respond. I just listened, waiting to see if anything else came through. The static continued, but beneath it, I could hear something new. A low, rhythmic sound like breathing. Slow and steady, in and out, in and out. I reached over and turned off the radio. The silence that followed was immediate and oppressive, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the whisper of the tires on ice. But even with the radio off, I could still hear it. That breathing, faint but present, coming from somewhere inside the cab. I looked around, checking the sleeper, checking the passenger seat, checking everywhere. Nothing, just me and my gear and the empty space. But the sound persisted, quiet but unmistakable. Then I realized where it was coming from. The vents. The heater vents were carrying the sound, pulling it in from outside and circulating it through the cab. I reached over and turned off the fan. The breathing stopped. I sat there, in the silence, hands tight on the wheel, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. That it was just the wind, or the sound of air moving through the heating system, or my own breath echoing back at me in the enclosed space. But I knew better. I'd been driving long enough to know the difference between normal sounds and something else. The snow was coming down harder now, reducing visibility to maybe 20 meters. I slowed even more, leaning forward, squinting through the windshield. The road was barely visible, just a vague, gray impression between walls of darkness. I couldn't see the center line, couldn't see the shoulder. All I could do was keep the truck moving straight and hope I was still on the pavement. That's when the first impact came. A solid thump against the driver's side of the cab, low down, near the door. Not a rock or debris, too deliberate, too heavy. It felt like something had struck the truck with force. I hit the brakes gently, bringing the truck to a stop, and grabbed my flashlight. The temperature outside was brutal, but I needed to see what had hit me. I pulled on my parka, my gloves, my face mask, and opened the door. The cold was instant and vicious, cutting through my layers like they weren't there. My breath froze in front of my face, crystallizing immediately. The snow was falling thick and fast, swirling in the beams of the truck's lights. I climbed down, boots crunching on the ice, and moved toward the side of the cab, shining my flashlight along the metal. No damage, no dents, no marks. The side of the truck was pristine, covered in a thin layer of frost and snow, but otherwise untouched. I checked the ground around the truck, looking for whatever had hit me. Nothing. No rocks, no branches, no debris. Just snow and ice and the empty road stretching away into darkness. And then I saw them. Footprints. Fresh footprints in the snow, leading away from the truck and disappearing into the darkness beyond the range of my flashlight. They were human-sized, deep impressions made by someone walking in heavy boots. But they didn't come from anywhere. They started right next to the truck, like someone had been standing there and then walked away. I followed them with my light, tracking them across the snow. They went in a straight line for maybe 10 meters, then stopped. Just ended. No turn, no continuation, just stopped mid-stride like the person had vanished. My heart was pounding now, the sound of it loud in my ears. I swept the light around, checking the trees, checking the road, checking everywhere. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Just the wind and the falling snow and my own ragged breathing. I backed towards the truck, keeping the light moving, and climbed into the cab. I slammed the door shut and locked it, fingers fumbling with the mechanism. The warmth inside felt artificial, fragile, like it could be stripped away at any moment. I sat there, staring out at the footprints through the windshield. They were already being covered by fresh snow, the edges blurring, the depth filling in. Within a minute, they'd be gone completely. I grabbed the CB mic, turned the radio back on, and keyed it. "This is Unit 47 requesting assistance. I'm approximately 40 kilometers north of Pelly Crossing, and I need confirmation. Is there anyone else on this highway tonight?" Static. Then, after a long pause, a voice. Not the same voice from before, but Margaret from dispatch. 47, we show you're the only northbound vehicle on the highway. What's your situation? I hesitated, trying to find the right words. I saw footprints next to the truck, but there's nobody here. Silence on the other end. Then, "Reed, are you feeling okay? Have you been driving too long?" "I'm fine," I said, but my voice sounded wrong even to my own ears. "I'm looking at the footprints right now. They're real. Reed, I need you to be honest with me. Are you experiencing any symptoms? Disorientation, confusion, visual disturbances?" I realized what she was thinking. Hypothermia. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Hallucinations brought on by exhaustion and stress, but I wasn't hallucinating. I was looking at physical evidence, clear as day. "Margaret, I'm fine, but something's not right out here." Another pause. "Reed, I need you to pull over somewhere safe and check your carbon monoxide detector. Make sure your exhaust isn't blocked, and if you need to turn around and come back, do it. Nobody's going to think less of you." I looked at the detector mounted on the wall of the cab. The green light was steady, showing normal levels. Detector's fine. Exhaust is clear. I'm good to continue. Read, I'm good, Margaret. I'll check in again in an hour. I hung up the mic before she could respond and put the truck in gear. The footprints were almost completely covered now, just faint depressions in the snow. I rolled forward slowly, eyes on the road, trying to focus on driving and nothing else. But I couldn't stop thinking about those prints. About how they'd started right next to my truck, like someone had been standing there the entire time, just out of sight, waiting. The snow continued to fall, heavier now, building up on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. The temperature gauge read -54, the coldest I'd seen all winter. And somewhere in the distance, faint but growing louder, I could hear the wind beginning to howl. The road ahead narrowed, flanked on both sides by dense forest. The trees pressed in close, their branches heavy with snow, creating a tunnel effect that made the darkness feel even more oppressive. I kept the speed steady, around 30 kilometers per hour, both hands on the wheel, eyes scanning constantly. That's when the CB crackled again. Northbound. The same voice, but closer now, louder, like whoever was speaking was right next to me. I grabbed the mic. "Who is this? Identify yourself." No response. Just that breathing again, slow and steady, coming through the speaker. "This is a restricted emergency frequency," I said, voice rising. "Identify yourself immediately, or I'm reporting this to authorities." The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was just static. Then, soft and clear, "Behind you." I spun around, looking at the sleeper berth, at the empty space behind the seats. Nothing there. Just my gear and supplies and the darkness beyond the small overhead light. But when I turned back to face the windshield, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, maybe 20 meters ahead, just at the edge of my headlight beams. Tall, wearing dark clothing, completely motionless. I hit the brakes, feeling the truck slide slightly on the ice before coming to a stop. The figure didn't move. I stared at it, my breath coming fast and shallow. It looked like a person, same height and build as an adult human, but there was something wrong about the proportions. The arms hung too low. The head was tilted at an angle that didn't look natural. I flashed my high beams. For a brief moment I saw it clearly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't wearing dark clothing, it was dark. The entire figure was black, like a cutout in reality. A human-shaped void that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. And where its face should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth, featureless darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. The road ahead was empty. No figure, no footprints. Just falling snow and the pale illumination of my headlights. I sat there frozen, trying to process what I'd just seen. My logical mind was screaming that it was an optical illusion, a trick of light and shadow and snow. But the part of me that had survived 16 winters in the north, the part that had learned to trust my instincts, knew better. Something was out here with me. I put the truck in gear and started moving again, faster now, pushing the speed up to 45 despite the conditions. I needed to get through this section of highway, needed to reach somewhere with lights and people and the reassuring solidity of civilization. The kilometers crawled by. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every sound was magnified, analyzed, feared. The CB stayed silent, but I kept the volume up, listening for that voice, for any sign that I wasn't alone. Then, at kilometer marker 178, I saw the abandoned truck stop. It loomed out of the darkness on the right side of the highway, a collection of dark buildings surrounded by drifts of snow. I'd passed it dozens of times before. It had been closed for years, the business failing when a new highway route had diverted most of the traffic. But now, in the darkness, it looked different. Wrong. There were lights on inside. Not bright lights, just a faint yellow glow coming from the windows of the main building. And in the parking lot I could see shapes. Vehicles, maybe. Or something else. I slowed down, staring at the building as I approached. The logical part of my brain said to keep driving, to not stop, to get as far away as possible. But another part, the part that needed to know, that needed to understand what was happening, made me ease off the gas and pull into the lot. The building looked worse up close. The siding was rotting, the windows were cracked, and the roof sagged under the weight of accumulated snow. But the lights were definitely on, that strange yellow glow spilling out onto the snow. I parked the truck, keeping the engine running, and sat there, staring at the building. Through the grimy windows I could see movement, shadows shifting behind the glass, like people moving around inside. The CB crackled. "Northbound, come inside." I stared at the radio, then at the building. The voice was coming from in there. Someone inside was calling to me. Against every instinct, I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my parka, and opened the door. The cold hit me immediately, but I barely noticed. I was focused on the building, on the lights, on finding out what the hell was going on. I walked across the parking lot, boots crunching on the ice, and approached the main entrance. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was a wreck. Broken furniture, scattered debris, walls covered in peeling paint and water damage. But in the center of the room, there was a table. And on that table, a CB radio, its light glowing green, its speaker crackling with static. Nobody else was there. I walked toward the radio, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The building smelled of mold and rot and something else, something acrid and chemical. I reached out and touched the radio. It was warm. Someone had been here recently. Someone had left this running. I picked up the handset and keyed it. "Who's out there? Who's been calling me?" Static. Then, that breathing again. Coming through the speaker, but it wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, shining my flashlight toward the back of the room. And there, in the shadows beyond my beam, I saw them. Figures, multiple figures, standing in a line, motionless, watching me. I backed toward the door, keeping my light on them. They didn't move, didn't react, just stood there in perfect stillness. I reached the door, stumbled out into the cold, and ran back to my truck. I climbed into the cab, slammed the door, locked it, and threw the truck into gear. The tires spun on the ice for a moment before catching, and I pulled out of the lot, back onto the highway, driving faster than was safe. In my rearview mirror, I could see the building receding into darkness. The lights were still on, and in the doorway, I could see shapes, multiple shapes, standing there watching me go. I didn't look back again. I drove for another hour without stopping, pushing the truck to its limits on the icy road. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short gasps, my mind racing through what I'd seen. The logical explanations kept crumbling under the weight of evidence. Squatters in the abandoned building, maybe. People living rough in the winter. But why would they leave a CB radio running? Why would they stand in the dark like that? And the figure on the road? The one that had vanished. The one that wasn't wearing darkness but was darkness. I tried calling Margaret again, but all I got was static. The radio was working. I could hear the carrier wave, but no voices came through. Just that endless hiss and crackle, like the entire communication network had been swallowed by interference. The snow was coming down in sheets now, a full whiteout in progress. My visibility was down to maybe 10 meters, and I was navigating more by feel than sight, keeping the truck centered on what I hoped was the road, praying I didn't drift into the ditch. Then the impact started. Thump against the passenger side this time. Hard and deliberate. Thump, thump. Now on the driver's side. Rapid succession like something running alongside the truck and striking it repeatedly. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it out the window, but all I could see was swirling snow and darkness. The impacts continued, moving from the front of the cab to the back, following the length of the trailer. Like something was pacing the truck, matching its speed, reaching out to touch it as it passed. Thump. Thump, thump. I hit the gas, accelerating despite the conditions, trying to outrun whatever was out there. The speedometer climbed to 60, then 70. The truck shuddered on the ice, fishtailing slightly, but I kept the pressure on. The impact stopped. I eased off the gas, letting the speed drop back down to a safer level. My heart was hammering, my palms slick with sweat despite the cold. I checked the mirrors, looking for anything following me, but all I saw was white. That's when the CB crackled again. "Northbound, stop!" I ignored it, keeping my eyes on the road. "Northbound, stop, please." There was desperation in the voice now, not threat, but pleading. Like whoever was out there needed me to stop, needed me to help. "Who are you?" I asked, keying the mic. "What do you want?" No response, just static. Then, breaking through the interference, a new voice. Female this time, younger, scared. "Please, we need help. We're stuck. We've been stuck for days." I felt my chest tighten. The trucker in me, the part that had been trained to help people in distress, warred with the part that had seen things tonight I couldn't explain. "Where are you?" I asked carefully. "Up ahead, kilometer 195. We're in the ditch. Please, it's so cold." I checked my GPS. I was at kilometer 188. 7 kilometers to go. 7 kilometers to decide whether I was driving into a trap or toward people who genuinely needed help. "How many are you?" I asked. Static. Then, 4, 2 adults, 2 children. Our vehicle broke down. The heater stopped working. We've been trying to signal for help, but nobody's come. 2 children. The words hit me like a physical blow. If there were kids out there, kids in distress, I couldn't just drive past. No matter what I'd seen, no matter what my instincts were telling me. "I'm coming," I said. "Hold tight, 7 minutes." I pushed the speed up again, carefully, watching the road, counting down the kilometers. 9, 190, 191. R1. The snow was starting to lighten, the whiteout breaking up into scattered flurries. I could see further now, maybe 20 meters. Then I saw them, or rather, I saw the lights. Hazard lights flashing on the right side of the road, partially buried in the snow. A vehicle, nose first in the ditch, exactly where the voice had said. I pulled over, set my own hazards, and grabbed my emergency kit. Heavy parka, blankets, first aid supplies, flares. I climbed out of the cab and approached the vehicle, flashlight cutting through the falling snow. It was an SUV, relatively new, with Yukon license plates. The hood was crumpled from the impact with the snowbank, and the windshield was covered in frost. I could see shapes inside, motionless. I knocked on the driver's window. "Hello? Can you hear me?" No response. I tried the door. It was unlocked. I pulled it open and the interior light flickered on. The vehicle was empty. No people, no adults, no children. Just empty seats and a CB radio mounted on the dash, its light glowing green. I backed away, my breath fogging in the cold air. The radio crackled. "Northbound." I ran back to my truck, threw the door open and climbed inside. I locked the doors, put the truck in gear, and accelerated away from the abandoned SUV. In my mirror, I could see the hazard lights still flashing, growing smaller, then disappearing as I rounded a curve. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. Someone had set that up. Someone had called me on the CB, used a woman's voice, mentioned children, all to get me to stop. But why? What did they want? I grabbed my own CB mic and keyed it, broadcasting on the emergency channel. This is Unit 47 broadcasting in the clear. There is a situation on the Klondike Highway, kilometer 195. Abandoned vehicle in the ditch, possible distress call that was faked. I am proceeding north. If anyone can hear this, please respond. Static. Just endless static. Then, cutting through. Behind you. I looked in the mirror. The road behind me was empty. Just a tunnel of darkness beyond the reach of my taillights. Behind you, the voice repeated. Clearer now, urgent. I adjusted the mirror, angling it to see further back, and there, at the very edge of visibility, I saw them. Lights. Headlights. Approaching fast. A vehicle was coming up behind me, moving at a speed that was reckless for these conditions. I could see it now, a large truck, similar to mine, closing the distance rapidly. I sped up, trying to maintain some space, but the other vehicle kept pace. It was right on my tail now, high beams on, filling my mirrors with blinding light. Then it pulled alongside me. I glanced over, trying to see who was driving, but the other cab was dark. No interior lights, no visible driver, just a massive shape moving in parallel with me, matching my speed exactly. The CB crackled. Northbound. The voice was coming from the other truck. I was certain of it now. What do you want? I shouted into the mic, not caring if anyone else heard. The other truck edged closer, narrowing the gap between us. We were side by side on the highway, two massive vehicles racing through the darkness at 70 kilometers per hour. Then it swerved toward me. I yanked the wheel to the right, barely avoiding collision. My truck shuddered as the right side tires caught the shoulder, then pulled back onto the pavement. The other vehicle swerved with me, staying parallel, like it was hurting me somewhere. Northbound, turn here. I saw it ahead, a turnoff, barely visible, marked by a small reflective sign. The other truck was pushing me toward it, forcing me to take the exit. I had a choice: fight for control of the highway, risk a collision at high speed on ice, or take the turnoff and see where it led. I took the turnoff. The other truck didn't follow. It continued north on the main highway, its lights disappearing into the distance within seconds. I slowed down, bringing the truck to a crawl on the narrow side road. My GPS had lost signal. My radio was dead. I was completely alone on a road I didn't recognize, in the middle of the Yukon wilderness. The road curved through dense forest, the trees pressing in close on both sides. The snow was deeper here, untouched, and I could feel the truck struggling through it. I should have been leaving tracks, but when I checked my mirrors, the snow behind me was smooth, unmarked, like I hadn't passed through at all. Then I saw the building. It was set back from the road, barely visible through the trees. A cabin larger than the one at the truck stop, with lights glowing in the windows. Warm, inviting yellow lights that looked completely out of place in this frozen wilderness. I stopped the truck, staring at the building. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to force my way back through the snow to the main highway. But I couldn't. The road ahead narrowed to nothing, swallowed by drifts. And the road behind me had vanished. I was trapped. The CB crackled one last time. Northbound, come inside. I sat there in the darkness, engine idling, staring at the warm lights of the cabin, and slowly, against my better judgment, I reached for my parka. The cold outside was worse than before, if that was possible. The thermometer on my dash read -61 Celsius. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in less than a minute. Your breath crystallizes before it leaves your mouth. The air itself becomes hostile, every inhalation burning your lungs. I pulled my face mask up, my hood tight, and climbed down from the cab. The snow came up to my knees, and every step was an effort. I could see my truck behind me, engine still running, headlights cutting through the darkness. It looked small suddenly, fragile, inadequate against the enormity of the wilderness surrounding me. The cabin was maybe 30 meters away, a solid structure, log walls chinked with what looked like fresh mortar, a steep metal roof to shed snow, windows that glowed with that impossible warmth. Smoke rose from the chimney, dissipating quickly in the extreme cold. I trudged toward it, each step deliberate, watching for ice, watching for holes in the snow, watching for anything out of place. As I got closer, I could hear something. Music. Faint, but unmistakable. Old country music, the kind you'd hear on AM radio in the middle of the night. The door was solid wood, with a simple handle. No lock visible. I stood there for a moment, my gloved hand hovering over the handle, giving myself one last chance to turn around. But where would I go? The road was gone. The highway was kilometers away through deep snow and dense forest. I was here, whether I wanted to be or not. I pushed the door open. The warmth hit me immediately, almost painful after the extreme cold. The interior of the cabin was exactly what you'd expect. A large main room with a stone fireplace, burning logs crackling cheerfully. Worn furniture, a couch and 2 chairs, arranged around the fire. A kitchen area along the back wall, with an old gas stove and a sink. The music was coming from a radio on the counter, the signal clear and strong despite the isolation. And sitting in one of the chairs, facing the fire, was a man. He didn't turn when I entered, just sat there, shoulders relaxed, hands folded in his lap, staring at the flames. "Hello?" I said, my voice muffled by the face mask. He didn't respond. I pulled the mask down, stepped further into the room, and tried again. "Hello? I'm sorry to intrude, but I got pushed off the highway and—" "Sit," the man said, cutting me off. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Warm yourself." I hesitated, then closed the door behind me and moved toward the fire. The other chair was positioned to give a view of both the fireplace and the door. I sat down carefully, keeping my distance from the man, my eyes constantly moving, cataloging details. He was maybe 60, with weathered skin and gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, heavy wool socks but no shoes. His hands were rough, scarred, the hands of someone who'd worked outdoors for decades. "Thank you," I said, "for the shelter." He didn't respond, just kept staring at the fire. I tried again. "I'm Reed. I'm hauling medical supplies to Dawson. Got diverted from the highway." Nothing. The silence stretched out, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the faint sound of the radio. I was starting to think he couldn't hear me or wouldn't respond when he finally spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The words hung in the air. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't have a choice. Something on the road pushed me off. "You always have a choice," he said, still not looking at me. "You could have stopped back at Pelly Crossing, could have turned around, could have waited for the weather to clear, but you chose to keep going. And now you're here." "I didn't choose this," I said, anger creeping into my voice. "I was forced off the highway by another truck. My GPS is dead. My radio is dead. I don't even know where I am." Finally, he turned to look at me. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless. and they held an expression I couldn't read. Not hostile, but not friendly either. Just assessing. "You're where you were always going to end up," he said. "The road doesn't make mistakes." I stood up, my hand moving instinctively towards the door. "I don't know what you're talking about, but I need to get back to the highway. Can you tell me which direction?" "Sit down," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me obey. A command, or maybe a warning. "You're not leaving tonight. The storm is getting worse, and there are things in the woods that you don't want to meet in the dark." I sat back down, my mind racing. What things? He turned back to the fire. "You've seen them already. On the road, at the truck stop, following you. They've been with you since you left Whitehorse." My blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" "Because I see them too," he said quietly. "Everyone who comes through here sees them. The voices on the radio, the footprints in the snow, the figures that watch from the darkness. They're always here, always waiting." "Waiting for what?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Then, for people like you. People who think they can outsmart the winter. People who push too hard, who ignore the warnings, who believe they're strong enough to handle whatever the North throws at them. The wilderness doesn't care about your strength. It doesn't care about your experience. It takes everyone eventually." I shook my head. "That's not... I've been driving these roads for 16 years. I know how to handle winter." "Do you?" He turned to look at me again, and this time there was something like pity in his eyes. "Then, why are you here? Why did you stop at that truck stop? Why did you investigate that abandoned SUV? Why did you let yourself be pushed off the highway?" I didn't have an answer. "They test you," he continued. "They show you things, impossible things, and they watch to see what you do. Most people run. They drive faster, they ignore the signs, they convince themselves it's all in their heads. But some people stop, they look, they try to understand. And that's when they're caught." "Caught by what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "By the territory itself. By the darkness and the cold and the endless winter. This place is alive in ways you don't understand. It has a will, a hunger, and it feeds on people who venture too deep." I stood up again, backing toward the door. "You're insane." "Maybe," he said, turning back to the fire. "Or maybe I'm the only one who's figured it out. Either way, you should stay here tonight. Sleep by the fire. In the morning, if the storm clears, you might be able to find your way back to the highway." "Might?" "Some people make it back," he said quietly. "Most don't." I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking. "I'm leaving. I'll take my chances with the storm." "You'll die out there," he said, without turning around. "The temperature is dropping. By midnight, it'll be -70. Your truck will freeze, your fuel will gel. You'll last maybe an hour before hypothermia takes you." I hesitated, my hand on the handle. He was right. I knew he was right. Going out into that cold, in the dark, with no clear direction, was suicide. But staying here with this man and his impossible stories. "What are you?" I asked. "Are you one of them?" He laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "No, I'm just someone who made the same mistake you did. I came here 20 years ago. Had a load to deliver, thought I could beat the weather. Got pushed off the highway, found this cabin, and I've been here ever since." 20 years? I stared at him. "That's impossible. Someone would have looked for you. Dispatch would have sent search parties." "They did," he said. "But they never found me because this place doesn't exist on any map. It's not part of the world, you know. It's something else, something in between. I couldn't process what he was saying. It was too much, too far outside the realm of possibility, but I also couldn't ignore the evidence. The road that had vanished, the GPS that had stopped working, the cabin that appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the wilderness. I let go of the door handle and moved back toward the fire. "In the morning," I said. "I'm leaving in the morning." "Maybe," he said again. And then he was quiet, staring into the flames, lost in thoughts I couldn't begin to imagine. I sat there for hours, watching the fire burn down, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling the cold press against the walls despite the warmth of the room. The man never moved, never spoke again. The radio continued to play, cycling through stations that shouldn't exist, playing music from decades past. Eventually, exhaustion won. I pulled my parka around me, leaned back in the chair, and closed my eyes. Just for a moment, I told myself. Just to rest. When I opened them again, the fire had gone out. The room was dark, and the man was gone. I sat up, my heart hammering. The only light came from the windows, that pale gray, pre-dawn light that barely penetrated the darkness. The radio was silent. The cabin was freezing, the temperature inside barely warmer than outside. I stood up, my joints stiff, my breath visible in the air. The door to the cabin was open, swinging slightly in the wind. Snow had blown in, creating a drift across the floor. I approached the door cautiously, looking out at the wilderness beyond. The storm had passed. The sky was clear, showing the first hints of dawn. And there, clearly visible in the fresh snow, was a path. Not a road, not even a trail. Just a line of footprints, leading away from the cabin and into the trees. Human footprints, the same size and shape as my own. I looked back at the cabin. In the cold light of dawn, it looked abandoned. The furniture was rotted, the logs were crumbling, and the fireplace was cold and choked with debris. This place hadn't been lived in for years. I walked back to where my truck should have been parked. The snow was undisturbed, no tire tracks, no evidence that a vehicle had ever been there. My truck was gone. I stood there in the freezing dawn completely alone, staring at empty snow where my truck should have been. And then I heard it. The CB radio, crackling to life inside the cabin. Northbound. I walked back to the cabin slowly, each step deliberate, my mind trying to process what was happening. The radio was sitting on the counter, exactly where it had been the night before. But now, in the daylight, I could see it clearly. It was old, decades old, with vacuum tubes and analog dials, the kind of radio that shouldn't work anymore, that should be sitting in a museum or a junkyard. But it was working. The green light glowed steady, and the speaker crackled with static. I picked up the handset. "Who is this?" "Northbound. Follow the path." I looked out the window at the line of footprints leading into the trees. "Where does it go? Home?" I hung up the handset and looked around the cabin one more time. In the daylight, its true state was revealed. This place had been abandoned for decades. The furniture was covered in dust and mildew. The windows were cracked. The roof had holes where you could see the sky, but it had been warm last night. The fire had been burning. The man had been sitting right there in that chair, talking to me. Either I'd hallucinated the entire thing, or something had wanted me to see it, had wanted me to believe it was real. I grabbed my emergency pack from where I'd left it by the door and stepped outside. The cold hit me immediately, but it was manageable now. Maybe -40, which felt almost warm after the extreme temperatures of the night before. I started following the footprints. They led through the forest, winding between trees, avoiding obstacles with the certainty of someone who knew exactly where they were going. I followed them for maybe 20 minutes, my breath steaming in the air, my boots crunching through the snow. Then I heard it. The sound of engines, the distant rumble of traffic. I picked up my pace, pushing through a final line of trees and emerged onto a road. Not the side road I'd been on last night, but the main highway. The Klondike Highway, exactly where it should be. And sitting on the shoulder, maybe 50 meters away, was my truck. I ran to it, my hands shaking as I tried the door. It was unlocked. I climbed inside, and everything was exactly as I'd left it. The heater was running, the radio was on. The GPS showed my location at kilometer 198 on the Klondike Highway, approximately 70 kilometers north of where I'd been pushed off the road. I sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to make sense of it. Had I driven here and not remembered? Had I been sleepwalking? Or had something else moved me, moved the truck while I was in that cabin? The CB crackled. Unit 47, this is Dawson Dispatch, do you copy? I grabbed the mic, my voice hoarse. This is 47, I copy. 47, we've been trying to reach you for hours. What's your status? I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It read 7:43 a.m. I'd entered the cabin around midnight. That meant I'd been gone for almost 8 hours, but it had felt like minutes. I'm north of Pelly Crossing, I said. Approximately kilometer 198. I had some issues last night. Radio went out. Copy that, 47. Are you able to continue to Dawson? I looked at the fuel gauge. Still 3/4 full. Looked at the temperature. -38 and rising as the sun came up. Looked at the road ahead, clear and empty. Affirmative, I said. Continuing to Dawson. ETA 3 hours. Copy, 47. Safe travels. I hung up the mic and put the truck in gear. I pulled onto the highway and started driving north, my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, didn't want to see if something was following me, didn't want to know if the forest behind me was empty or if shapes were moving between the trees. I just drove. The rest of the journey was uneventful. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the snow. The temperature climbed to a balmy -30. I passed other vehicles, southbound trucks heading back to Whitehorse, and I waved to them like everything was normal. I reached Dawson at 11:15 a.m. and delivered the load without incident. The receiving clerk checked me in, looked at the manifest, and signed off on everything. Rough trip? He asked, noting the ice buildup on my truck. You could say that, I replied. I called Margaret from the truck stop in Dawson, and she patched me through to the main office. Reed, what the hell happened out there? We lost contact with you for 8 hours. Radio problems, I said. Some kind of interference, couldn't get through. Reed, your GPS tracker shows you stopped at kilometer 145 for 6 hours. Just sitting there. We were about to send a search team. I looked at my logbook. According to my notes, I'd been moving the entire time. But if the GPS said I'd been stationary... I don't know what to tell you, I said. I kept driving. Maybe the tracker malfunctioned. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Reed, are you okay? Do you need some time off? I'm fine, I said, but I wasn't sure if I believed it. I stayed in Dawson for 2 days, sleeping in a motel, trying to convince myself that what had happened was explainable. Atmospheric interference, carbon monoxide exposure, exhaustion-induced hallucination. There were rational explanations for everything. But I couldn't explain the footprints, couldn't explain how my truck had moved 70 kilometers while I was in that cabin. Couldn't explain the man who'd been there and then wasn't. On the 3rd day, I loaded up for the return trip to Whitehorse. Different cargo, different schedule, but the same road. The Klondike Highway, stretching south through the wilderness. I made it as far as kilometer 198 before I saw it. The turnoff, the same one I'd taken 3 nights before. The same narrow side road leading into the forest. I slowed down, staring at it. In the daylight, it looked innocuous. Just an old logging road, probably unused for years. Nothing unusual about it. But I could see the tracks, truck tracks, leading off the highway and disappearing into the trees. Fresh tracks made recently, made by a vehicle the same size as mine. I stopped on the shoulder, engine idling, staring at those tracks. Part of me wanted to follow them, to drive back to that cabin and demand answers, to find the man and make him explain what had happened. But a larger part, the part that had survived 16 winters in the north, told me to keep driving, to leave it alone, to never come back. I put the truck in gear and continued south. I didn't look back, didn't check the mirror. I just drove, keeping my eyes on the road, my hands on the wheel, my mind focused on getting home. I made it to Whitehorse without incident. Delivered the load, filed my reports, and collected my pay. And then I turned in my resignation. Margaret tried to talk me out of it. Said I was one of their best drivers, said I knew the roads better than anyone. But I was done. Done with the Klondike. Done with the darkness and the cold and the things that moved in the spaces between the trees. I moved south. Took a job running freight through British Columbia and Alberta. Warmer routes, busier highways, places where you're never more than an hour from civilization. Places where the darkness doesn't press so close, where the cold doesn't seep into your bones, where the voices on the radio are always human. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through a particularly isolated stretch of highway, I'll hear it. Faint, barely audible over the static, but there. Northbound. And I'll check my mirrors just to make sure nothing's following me, just to make sure I'm still on the road I think I'm on. Because I learned something in those frozen woods, in that impossible cabin, on that road that wasn't there. The North doesn't let go easily, and once it has your scent, once it knows you've seen what's hidden in the darkness, it never really stops calling. Some nights, when the temperature drops and the wind picks up, I can still feel it. That pull, that voice on the radio whispering my name, telling me to turn around, to head north, to find that road again. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake, is that some part of me wants to. Some part of me wants to drive back up that highway, take that turnoff, follow those footprints to wherever they lead. Because there are answers there, in that cabin, in that forest. Answers about what's really waiting in the darkness, about what happens to the people who never make it home. But I won't, because I know that if I go back, if I follow those voices one more time, I won't be coming home. I'll become like that man, sitting in that chair, staring at the fire, waiting for the next lost driver to stumble through the door. And that's the real horror of it. Not the voices, not the footprints, not the impossible cabin. It's knowing that I could have been him, that I almost was him. That the only thing that separates me from that fate is the choice I made to keep driving, to ignore the call, to leave those answers behind. The North is still out there, waiting. The voices are still calling. And somewhere on the Klondike Highway at kilometer 145 or 198 or some other random point that changes every time, there's a turnoff. And someone will take it. Someone always does. My name is Marcus Thorne, and I've been running Arctic freight for 23 years. That's almost a quarter century of ice roads, whiteouts, and temperatures that would kill most people in under an hour. I've seen trucks jackknife on black ice and slide 300 feet before coming to rest. I've seen fuel lines freeze solid in the middle of the night. I've seen drivers get stranded in their cabs for 4 days straight, burning their cargo to stay warm until rescue crews could reach them. The North doesn't care about your experience, your skill, or your preparations. It takes what it wants when it wants. But in all those years, in all those miles of frozen highway and endless darkness, I'd never been part of a convoy. Not a real one, anyway. Sure, I'd driven alongside other trucks, matched speeds for a few hours, maybe shared some chatter over the CB. But a proper convoy, 3 or more trucks moving together with a plan, with coordination, with mutual support, that was something different. Something special. And on February 23rd, 2023, I became part of one. It started with a phone call from dispatch 3 days earlier. I was in Yellowknife, parked outside a Tim Hortons, finishing off a double-double and a couple of Timbits, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed it was Janet Koskinen, the routing supervisor for Northern Freight Solutions, the company I'd been contracting for since 2018. Janet was good people, competent, careful, the kind of dispatcher who'd pull a driver off the road if she even suspected they were pushing too hard. "Marcus," she said when I answered, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant she had something unusual to discuss. "I've got a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "We've got 3 loads heading to Tuktoyaktuk. All urgent, all temperature-sensitive medical and research supplies. The ice road opened 2 days ago, but you know how it is this early in the season. Conditions are marginal, weather forecasts are sketchy, and we need experienced drivers who can handle whatever comes up." I took a sip of my coffee, thinking it through. Tuktoyaktuk, or Tuk as everyone called it, was about as far north as you could drive in Canada. The ice road across the frozen Mackenzie River and Arctic coastline only opened for a few weeks each year, and even then, conditions could be treacherous. It was a haul that demanded respect, preparation, and a healthy dose of caution. "What's the convoy structure?" I asked. 3 trucks, 3 drivers. You'd be lead truck if you accept. The other 2 are Gary Henson and Thomas Brightwell. You know them? I knew Gary by reputation. Solid driver, maybe 15 years of experience, based out of Inuvik. Quiet guy, professional, the kind of person who showed up on time and did the job without drama. Thomas. I'd actually met once at a truck stop in Hay River. Younger, maybe early 30s, but experienced for his age. He'd cut his teeth running supplies to mining operations in the Northwest Territories, which meant he knew how to handle rough conditions. "I know Gary's name," I said. "Met Thomas once, both good choices. So, you're in?" I thought about it for maybe 3 seconds. The money was good, the route was challenging but manageable, and having 2 other experienced drivers as backup made it safer than running solo. "Yeah, I'm in. When do we leave?" "Day after tomorrow, February 23rd, early morning departure from Inuvik. You'll need to get up there by the 22nd. Can you make it?" "I can make it." We discussed logistics for another 10 minutes. The loads were already staged in Inuvik, waiting for us. Each truck would be carrying different cargo, medical supplies, research equipment for the Arctic stations, food supplies for the community. The total weight for each rig was right at the maximum safe limit for the ice roads, which meant we'd need to be careful about speed and spacing. Too fast, and you risked breaking through weak spots in the ice. Too close together, and you concentrated too much weight in one area. "One more thing," Janet said, her voice dropping slightly. "Weather forecast is calling for a major system to move in on the 24th. You'll need to be through the ice road section and into Tuk before it hits, otherwise you'll be stuck waiting it out. Could be days." "We'll make the schedule," I said. "I know you will. That's why I called you first." I hung up and finished my coffee, then spent the next hour going over my truck with a fine-tooth comb. The rig was a 2019 Kenworth T800, heavy-duty, Arctic spec, with every modification and upgrade needed for extreme cold operations. Block heater, battery blankets, Arctic-grade fuel lines, extra insulation, backup heating systems, the works. I checked the tires, the brakes, the lights, the air lines. Topped off all the fluids, made sure the satellite phone was charged, verified the emergency supplies were complete and accessible. The drive from Yellowknife to Inuvik takes about 2 full days in winter if you're careful, and the weather cooperates. I left on the evening of the 20th, taking my time, stopping every few hours to check the truck, to rest, to eat. The Dempster Highway, which would take me most of the way, is one of those roads that demands your full attention. Narrow, winding, carved through some of the most remote wilderness in North America. If something goes wrong out there, you're on your own for hours, maybe days. I rolled into Inuvik late on the evening of the 22nd, tired but satisfied with the condition of the truck. The town was dark, as it always is in February, with just the glow of streetlights and house windows breaking up the blackness. The temperature was sitting at -38°C, cold but manageable. I found the staging area where the loads were waiting and backed in next to 2 other trucks that were already there. I climbed out of my cab and saw a figure approaching from the other trucks. He was bundled up in a heavy parka, face mostly hidden, but I could see the glint of glasses catching the light. "Marcus Thorne?" he called out. "That's me." He pulled down his face mask, revealing a weathered face with a neat gray beard. "Gary Henson, good to meet you." We shook hands, both of us wearing thick gloves that made the gesture awkward but necessary. "Likewise. Where's Thomas?" "Inside the office, getting the final paperwork sorted." Gary gestured toward a small building adjacent to the loading area. "Should be out in a few minutes. Want to grab some coffee? There's a pot brewing inside." I nodded, and we walked toward the building together. The wind had picked up, not strong but steady, carrying fine snow that stung any exposed skin. Inside, the building was blessedly warm, heated by a roaring propane heater in the corner. A young man was standing at a desk, going over papers with a clerk. He looked up as we entered. "Marcus?" he asked. "Yeah. You must be Thomas." He was younger than I'd remembered, maybe 28 or 29, with short dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He stuck out his hand and we shook. "Good to meet you properly. I think we crossed paths once in Hay River?" "About 2 years ago," I confirmed. "You were hauling mining equipment." "Still am, most of the time. This is my first run to Tuk, though. Been looking forward to it." Gary poured 3 cups of coffee from the industrial-sized pot sitting on a folding table, and we gathered around a map that the clerk had spread out on the desk. It showed our route from Inuvik to Tuktoyaktuk, about 150 kilometers if you went by the winter ice road. The summer route was longer, following the coast, but in February the ice road was the only option. "Weather update," the clerk said, pointing to a printout of the forecast. "System is still tracking to hit on the 24th, but it's moving faster than originally predicted. You'll want to be through the ice road section by early afternoon tomorrow, latest. After that, visibility will drop to near zero." "What's the ice condition?" Gary asked. "Reports from yesterday say it's good. Minimum 40 centimeters throughout, some sections over 60. No pressure ridges reported, no overflow. Should be smooth sailing if you follow the markers." We studied the map for another few minutes, discussing spacing, communication protocols, and contingency plans. The agreement was simple. I'd lead, Gary would be second, Thomas would bring up the rear. We'd maintain at least 100 meters between trucks to avoid concentrating weight. We'd check in via CB every 15 minutes. If anyone had a problem, we'd all stop and assess. "One more thing," I said, looking at both of them. "If conditions deteriorate, if we hit a whiteout or the ice starts looking questionable, we don't push it. We find a safe spot, we stop, we wait it out. Understood?" Both of them nodded. Gary's expression was serious, professional. Thomas looked eager but not reckless. I felt good about the team. We finished our coffee and headed back out into the cold. The loads were already staged, tarped and secured, waiting to be coupled to our tractors. I spent the next hour doing a thorough inspection of my trailer, checking every strap, every seal, every connection point. Gary and Thomas were doing the same with their loads. By the time we finished, it was past midnight. "Get some sleep," I told them. "We roll out at 0600. Weather window is tight and I want to be on the ice by 0700. They both agreed, and we dispersed to our respective cabs. I climbed into mine, set my alarm, and tried to sleep. But sleep came slowly. My mind kept running through scenarios, contingencies, potential problems. It's a habit I've developed over the years. Before every major run, I mentally rehearse everything that could go wrong and how I'd handle it. Flat tire, engine failure, ice breakthrough, whiteout, medical emergency. I run through each scenario until I feel prepared, until my subconscious has mapped out responses. Eventually, exhaustion won and I drifted off. But even in sleep, part of my brain was still working, still preparing, still aware that in a few hours we'd be heading into one of the most unforgiving environments on the planet. The alarm went off at 0530. I woke instantly, a skill learned from decades of early mornings and tight schedules. The cab was cold, the heater having cycled down during the night, and I could see frost forming on the inside of the windows. I fired up the engine, let it warm for a few minutes, then climbed out to do a pre-departure walk-around. The temperature had dropped overnight. My dashboard thermometer was reading -43 and the air had that particular quality of extreme cold, where every breath burned your lungs and the slightest exposure of skin brought instant pain. I moved quickly, checking lights, tires, connections, making sure everything was road-ready. Gary and Thomas emerged from their cabs at almost the same moment, and we gathered near my truck for a final briefing. The sky was still completely dark, as it would be for several more hours, and would remain mostly dark even at midday. The stars overhead were brilliant, sharp points of light in the crystal-clear air that comes with extreme cold. "Everyone ready?" I asked. Both nodded. Gary looked calm, methodical. Thomas had a hint of nervousness in his eyes, but also determination. Good signs. "Radio check," I said, and we all climbed back into our cabs. I keyed the CB. "This is lead truck, Unit 1. Radio check." "Unit 2. Reading you 5x5. Gary's voice came through clearly. "Unit 3, loud and clear," Thomas confirmed. "Good. We maintain Channel 9 for convoy communication. If we need to reach outside help, we switch to emergency Channel 16. Everyone keep your radios on, volume up. We check in every 15 minutes, even if nothing's happening. If I stop, you stop. If anyone has a problem, call it out immediately. Questions?" "Negative, lead," Gary said. "All good here," Thomas added. "All right then, let's roll." I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the staging area, heading north toward the ice road. In my mirrors, I could see the lights of Gary's truck falling into position behind me, and a few seconds later, Thomas's lights appeared behind Gary. 3 trucks moving in formation through the Arctic darkness. The road out of Inuvik was paved and well-maintained, but within 10 kilometers we transitioned to gravel and then to the marked ice road. The transition was gradual, the solid ground giving way to the frozen surface of the Mackenzie River Delta. The ice road markers were visible in my headlights, tall wooden stakes with reflective tape placed every 50 meters to guide drivers along the safe route. "Lead truck to convoy," I said into the CB. "We're on the ice. Reduce speed to 40 kilometers per hour. Maintain spacing." "Unit 2, copy." Gary acknowledged. Unit 3, copy, Thomas echoed. The ice beneath my tires felt solid. The surface, hard-packed snow over thick ice. I could feel the subtle shift in the way the truck moved. The slight give that comes from driving on a frozen surface rather than solid ground. But it wasn't concerning. This was normal, expected. The ice road had been open for 2 days, which meant it had been tested, verified, cleared for use. We drove in silence for the first 30 minutes, all of us focused on the road, on the spacing, on the conditions. The darkness was absolute beyond my headlights, a wall of black that pressed in from all sides. The only sound was the rumble of the engine and the crunch of tires on snow. Then, at 0645, I made my first radio check. Lead truck to convoy, status report. Unit 2, all good. Ice feels solid, visibility clear, Gary responded. Unit 3, no issues, running smooth, Thomas added. Copy that. Maintain speed and spacing, next check at 0700. We continued north. The ice road markers kept appearing in my headlights, regular as metronomes guiding us across the frozen landscape. To my left and right, I could see nothing but darkness, but I knew what was out there. Vast expanses of frozen delta, dotted with islands of willow and spruce, broken by channels and overflow areas where the ice could be thin or non-existent. The markers defined the safe path, the route that had been surveyed and tested to ensure it could support the weight of heavy trucks. At 0700, I made another check. Everyone was still good. The temperature was holding steady at -43, no wind yet, which was fortunate. Wind can make extreme cold exponentially more dangerous, driving the wind chill down to life-threatening levels and creating whiteout conditions even when there's no fresh snow falling. We'd been on the ice for almost an hour when I saw something that made me slow down. Ahead, maybe 200 meters, there was a dark patch on the surface. In the Arctic, dark patches on ice can mean several things. It could be overflow, where water has seeped up through cracks and frozen on the surface, creating a rough, dangerous texture. It could be thin ice, where the darker color indicates less snow cover and potentially weaker structure. Or it could be nothing, just a shadow or a trick of the light. I keyed the radio. Lead truck to convoy, slowing down to investigate potential hazard ahead. Maintain distance. Unit 2, copy, slowing down, Gary responded. Unit 3, understood, dropping back, Thomas said. I brought my speed down to about 20 kilometers per hour, watching the dark patch carefully as I approached. When I got closer, I could see what it was, a section where someone had plowed through drifted snow, exposing the darker ice beneath. Not a hazard, just a cosmetic difference, but I was glad I'd checked. Lead truck to convoy, false alarm, just exposed ice, no overflow, resuming normal speed. Unit 2, copy. Unit 3, understood. We continued on. The routine of checking in every 15 minutes became a comfortable rhythm, a reassurance that we were all still there, still together, still moving forward. At 0730, the sky began to show the first hints of pre-dawn light, not true daylight but a gradual lessening of the absolute darkness. The stars faded, and the horizon became visible as a dark line against a slightly less dark sky. By 0800, we had enough ambient light that I could see more of our surroundings. The landscape was exactly as I'd expected. Flat, frozen, featureless, except for the occasional stand of small trees on an island. The ice beneath us stretched in every direction, a white desert broken only by our tracks, and the line of markers guiding us north. Lead truck to convoy, I said. We're making good time. Current position about 60 kilometers from Inuvik, 90 to go. Weather's holding. Everyone still good? Unit 2, all systems nominal, Gary reported. Fuel at 3/4. Engine temp normal, no issues. Unit 3, same here, Thomas added. This is actually pretty smooth so far. Don't jinx it, I said, half joking. Stay focused, we're not even halfway yet. The next hour passed without incident. The light continued to improve, though calling it daylight would be generous. It was more like extended twilight, a gray half-light that let you see but never felt quite natural. The temperature had actually risen slightly, up to -39. Small mercy. Then, at 09:15, the wind started. It began as a gentle breeze, barely noticeable. But within 10 minutes, it had built into a steady wind, maybe 30 kilometers per hour, blowing from the northwest. Fine snow began to lift off the ice surface, swirling in front of my headlights like smoke. I checked the forecast printout I'd taped to my dashboard. The system wasn't supposed to arrive until late afternoon, but weather in the Arctic is notoriously unpredictable. What felt like a gentle wind could rapidly become something much worse. Lid truck to convoy, winds picking up, everyone tighten your focus, visibility might start to degrade. Unit 2, I'm seeing it too. Keeping eyes on the markers, Gary responded, his voice steady but with a note of increased attention. Unit 3, copy. Still got visual on Unit 2's lights, Thomas confirmed. The wind continued to build. By 09:30, it was gusting to maybe 45 kilometers per hour, and the snow it was picking up was starting to reduce visibility. I could still see the markers clearly, but the spaces between them were getting hazier, the far distances fading into a gray-white murk. Lead truck to convoy, reducing speed to 35. This is getting borderline. If it gets worse, we may need to stop and wait it out. Unit 2 agreed. Better safe than sorry, Gary said. Unit 3, I'm okay to continue as long as we can see the markers, Thomas added. But I defer to your judgment. I kept driving, my hands tight on the wheel, my eyes constantly scanning. The markers kept appearing one after another, guiding us forward. The wind was loud now, howling around the cab, buffeting the truck enough that I had to make constant small corrections to stay on track. Then, at Aero 9:45, Gary's voice came through the CB, and there was tension in it. Lead truck, this is Unit 2. I'm seeing something weird with my rear trailer tires. Might be losing pressure on the right side. I checked my mirrors. Gary's truck was still visible, maybe 120 meters back, but I couldn't make out details. Can you tell if it's actually flat or just feels off? Hard to say. Steering feels normal, but there's a vibration that wasn't there before. I think I need to stop and check. I scanned ahead, looking for a good place to pull over. The ice road was marked, but there wasn't really a shoulder. If we stopped, we'd just be sitting on the main track, which wasn't ideal, but also wasn't dangerous as long as we had our hazards on and nobody else was coming. All right, I'm pulling over. Let's do a quick inspection. Thomas, you stay back about 50 meters. Keep your hazards on. Gary, once I stop, you stop behind me. We'll all dismount and take a look. Unit 2, copy. Unit 3, understood. Dropping back now. I slowed down gradually, watching for a section of ice that looked particularly solid and flat, and brought the truck to a stop. In my mirrors, I saw Gary's lights getting closer, and beyond them, Thomas's lights maintaining distance. The wind was shrieking now, and the snow it was carrying had reduced visibility to maybe 50 meters. I grabbed my parka and gloves, double-checked that I had my flashlight, and opened the door. The cold and wind hit me like a physical force, stealing my breath. I climbed down and made my way back toward Gary's truck, leaning into the wind, my boots crunching on the hard-packed snow. Gary was already out of his cab, moving toward his trailer. Thomas had stayed in his truck, as instructed, but I could see him watching us through his windshield. "Which side?" I shouted over the wind. "Rear axle, right side," Gary shouted back. We made our way around the trailer, and Gary shined his flashlight on the tires. I could see it immediately. The outermost tire on the right rear axle was noticeably lower than the others. Not completely flat, but definitely losing pressure. "Probably picked up something," Gary said, his voice muffled by his face mask. "Piece of ice, maybe, or a chunk of frozen debris. Punctured it slowly. Can you change it?" He looked at the tire, then at the conditions around us. The wind was getting stronger, the visibility worse. Changing a heavy truck tire in these conditions would take at least an hour, maybe more, and would expose us to extreme cold the entire time. "I can," he said slowly, "but I'd rather not do it here if we can avoid it." "How far to the next checkpoint?" I pulled out my GPS unit, which I'd been keeping in my interior pocket to keep it warm. The screen took a moment to refresh in the cold, then showed our position. About 40 kilometers to the first community on the far side of the delta. Small place, but they'll have shelter and maybe tools if we need them. Gary looked at the tire again, then back at me. "I think it'll hold for 40 kilometers. It's not completely flat, and we're not carrying maximum weight. If I keep my speed down and don't hit any rough patches, should be fine." I wasn't thrilled with the plan, but the alternatives were worse. Changing the tire here meant exposing ourselves to extreme cold for an extended period in deteriorating conditions. Trying to turn back meant adding another 60 kilometers to the trip. Moving forward was the least bad option. "All right," I said. "But we drop speed to 25 and you watch that tire constantly. First sign it's getting worse, we stop immediately and reassess." Agreed. We climbed back into our respective cabs. I keyed the CB. "Lead truck to convoy. Gary's got a slow leak in a rear tire. We're proceeding to the next community at reduced speed. Thomas, you drop back to 200 meters. If that tire blows, I don't want you caught in debris." "Unit 3, copy. Increasing distance now," Thomas responded. We got moving again, much slower now, and the wind continued to build. The conditions were officially deteriorating from uncomfortable to concerning. The snow being blown across the ice was creating a ground blizzard effect where you couldn't see the surface beneath you and the horizon disappeared entirely. I was navigating almost entirely by the markers, watching for each one to appear in my headlights, confirming we were still on the safe route. At 10:15, I made another radio check. Gary reported the tire was holding but losing pressure slowly. Thomas said he was fine, but visibility was getting bad. I agreed. This was approaching whiteout conditions, and we still had 30 kilometers to go. "Lead truck to convoy. If this gets any worse, we stop. I don't care if we're 10 kilometers from shelter. We're not driving blind." "Unit 2 agreed," Gary said. "Unit 3, I trust your call," Thomas added. We pushed on. Each kilometer felt like 10. The wind was a constant roar, and the truck was being buffeted hard enough that I was making continuous steering corrections. The markers kept appearing, thank God, steady and reliable. The only fixed points in a world that had become nothing but gray and white and howling wind. Then, at 10:45, something changed. The markers stopped. I slowed to a crawl, scanning ahead, looking for the next one. Nothing, just unbroken white. I checked my GPS. According to the coordinates, I was still on the ice road route. The markers should be there. It should be there. "Lead truck to convoy. I've lost visual on the markers, stopping to assess." "Unit 2, I can still see the last marker behind us," Gary said. "It's about 70 meters back." I put the truck in park and sat there, trying to understand what had happened. Markers don't just disappear. Either they'd been knocked down by wind, buried by drifting snow, or I'd somehow drifted off the marked route. But my GPS said I was where I was supposed to be. "I'm going out to look around," I said. "Stay in your trucks. I'll report back in 5 minutes. I climbed out into the maelstrom. The wind nearly knocked me over, and the blowing snow was so thick I could barely see my own truck. I walked forward slowly, sweeping my flashlight back and forth, looking for any sign of a marker. 30 meters ahead of my truck, I found one. But it was lying on the ice, the wooden stake broken off at the base. I kept walking, found another one 20 meters further, also down. And another. Something had knocked down at least 3 markers in a row. I made my way back to the truck, fighting the wind every step. Once inside, I keyed the CB, found the problem. Multiple markers are down, probably from the wind, but I found them, so we know we're still on the right track. I'm going to navigate by GPS for the next few kilometers until we pick up the marker line again. Unit 2, copy. I'll follow your tracks, Gary said. Unit 3, same here, Thomas confirmed. I put the truck back in gear and started forward, watching the GPS closely, cross-referencing with the map coordinates I'd memorized. The route should continue northwest for another 15 kilometers, then swing slightly west toward the community. We drove for 20 minutes, painfully slow, the visibility getting worse if that was even possible. Then, just when I was starting to think we'd have to stop and wait it out, the wind began to ease. Not much, just enough that I could start to see more than 10 meters ahead. And there, emerging from the blowing snow like ghosts, were the markers again, standing upright, intact, guiding us forward. Lead truck to convoy, we've got markers again. Looks like we're through the worst of it. Unit 2, I see them too, and my tire's still holding. Maybe another 15 kilometers? Gary sounded relieved. Unit 3, visibility is improving back here, Thomas added. I can actually see Unit 2's taillights now. We continued on, and Gary was right. The wind began to die down, and the snow stopped blowing. Within another 10 minutes, we could see a reasonable distance, maybe 100 meters. The gray light of the Arctic day had strengthened slightly, enough to see the vast expanse of ice around us and the dark line of land ahead. That's it, I said over the CB. That dark line ahead, that's the shore. We're almost off the ice. Another 10 minutes. We covered the last few kilometers without incident, and right at 11:30, my tires transitioned from ice to solid ground. The relief was immediate and profound. We'd made it across. The worst was behind us. Lead truck to convoy. We're off the ice. Gary, there's a pullout about 2 clicks ahead where we can stop safely and deal with that tire. Everyone doing okay? Unit 2, yeah, I'm good. That tire's still holding, but it's definitely flat now. Going to need the spare. Unit 3, I'm fine. Actually feeling pretty good about that crossing, Thomas said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Good work, everyone. Let's get that tire changed and grab some food. We've earned it. We pulled into the small community, which consisted of maybe 24 buildings clustered around a central area. There was a community hall, a small store, and a maintenance shed. A few people were visible, bundled up against the cold, watching our convoy with interest. 3 big trucks showing up was probably the most exciting thing that had happened all week. I backed my truck into a cleared area and climbed out. The wind was much lighter here, blocked by the buildings and the terrain, and the temperature felt almost balmy in comparison. Still, -35 or so, but after what we'd just been through, it felt downright comfortable. Gary was already jacking up his truck, and Thomas had climbed down to help. I walked over, and together we got the damaged tire off and the spare on. It took about 40 minutes, all of us working together, and by the end of it we were cold but satisfied. That could have been a lot worse, Gary said, checking the lug nuts one final time. If that had blown while we were on the ice in that wind, he didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew what could have happened. We went into the community hall, which doubled as a small cafe, and ordered coffee and sandwiches. The woman running the place, an Inuvialuit woman named Sarah, was friendly and talkative. "You boys heading to Tuk?" she asked. "Yeah, medical supplies and research equipment," I told her. She nodded. "Good timing. Weather's supposed to get nasty tonight. You'll want to be there before it hits." "That's the plan. How far from here?" "Maybe 2 hours in good conditions. Road's pretty good right now. Got plowed yesterday." We finished our food, used the washroom, topped off our fuel from jerry cans we were carrying, and prepared to head out. It was 12:45 when we got back on the road, with about 80 kilometers to go to Tuktoyaktuk. The road from the community to Tuk follows the coast, winding through low hills and past numerous small lakes, all frozen solid. The surface was hard-packed snow over gravel, much easier to drive on than the ice road, and we made good time. I set our speed at 50 kilometers per hour, faster than on the ice but still conservative. At 1300, I made another radio check. Everyone was good. The trucks were running smoothly. The weather was holding, though I could see dark clouds building on the western horizon. "That system is coming in faster than forecast," I observed over the CB. "We're going to be racing it." "How much further?" Thomas asked. "About 60 kilometers. Should make it with an hour to spare if the weather holds." But the weather didn't hold. At 13:15, the wind returned. Not the howling maelstrom we'd experienced on the ice, but a steady, strong wind that immediately began to degrade visibility. Then the snow started. Not blown snow, but actual snowfall. Big flakes coming down thick and fast. "Lead truck to convoy. Weather's moving in. Increasing speed to 60, but stay sharp. Visibility is dropping. Unit 2, copy. I'm seeing it too," Gary responded. "Unit 3, understood. Visibility down to maybe 50 meters back here," Thomas added. I pushed the speed up carefully, watching the road, watching the mirrors, keeping track of the convoy. 50 kilometers to go. 45, 40. The snow kept falling, heavier now, and the wind kept building. Visibility dropped to 30 meters, then 20. Then, at 13:45, with about 30 kilometers still to go, Gary's voice came through the CB. And this time there was real concern in it. "Lead truck, this is Unit 2. I'm showing a temperature spike in my engine. Might be losing coolant." That was bad. Losing coolant in extreme cold meant the engine would overheat despite the ambient temperature. And if it seized, Gary would be stranded. "How bad is it?" "Climbing fast. I'm at 190 and rising. Normal is 180. "Can you make it to Tuk?" A pause, then, "I don't know. Maybe, but if I push it and the engine seizes, I'm done." I made a decision. "Pull over. Let's check it now while we still have options. If we get closer to Tuk and it fails, we might not be able to recover you before the weather gets too bad." "Unit 2, copy. Pulling over now." I found a wide spot in the road and pulled off, leaving room for Gary to stop behind me. Thomas stayed back, as usual. We all climbed out, and the wind immediately tried to knock us over. The snow was falling so thick I could barely see Gary's truck, even though it was only 30 meters away. We gathered at Gary's truck and he popped the hood. Steam was rising from the engine compartment, a bad sign. I climbed up on the step and looked inside. There was coolant everywhere, sprayed across the engine block and dripping onto the ground where it froze instantly. "You've got a leak," I said, my voice raised over the wind. "Looks like a hose. Maybe a clamp failed." Gary climbed up next to me and assessed the damage. "That's the upper radiator hose. I've got a spare, but it's going to take time to replace in these conditions." "How much time?" "Maybe an hour, maybe more." I looked at the sky, at the snow that was falling faster by the minute, at the wind that was building toward another full whiteout. We didn't have an hour. The weather was deteriorating too fast. "Can you patch it? Just enough to get to Tuck?" Gary examined the hose more closely. "Maybe. If I had some hose tape and some clamps, I could try. But it won't hold for long, and if it fails on the way, the engine will overheat in minutes." Thomas had walked up and was listening. "How far to Tuck?" he asked. "About 30 kilometers. 20 minutes in good conditions, but these aren't good conditions." "What if we tow him?" Thomas suggested. "My truck can handle the weight. We chain our 2 trucks together. I pull him. He keeps his engine off to prevent damage. Once we get to Tuck, he can do a proper repair." I thought about it. It was risky. Towing on these roads in this weather wasn't something you did lightly. But the alternatives were worse. Either we spent an hour trying to patch a hose that might fail anyway, exposing all of us to increasing danger, or we left Gary here and came back for him later, which meant he'd be alone in his cold truck for hours in a storm. "All right," I said. "Let's do it. But we go slow, 15 kilometers per hour max. Thomas, you watch for any change in resistance, any sign something's wrong. Gary, you keep your radio on and your windows clear. If you start sliding or losing control, call it out immediately." We spent the next 20 minutes getting the tow set up. Gary and Thomas had tow chains in their emergency kits, and we used both, doubled up for extra strength. We connected Thomas's rear bumper to Gary's front bumper, making sure the chains were tight, but with just enough slack to absorb shocks. By the time we finished, the visibility was down to maybe 15 meters. The snow was so thick it formed a solid white curtain, and the wind was howling again. The storm had caught us, and we were still 30 kilometers from shelter. "Lead truck to convoy. We're moving out. I'll lead. Thomas and Gary will follow together. Maintain minimum safe speed. Everyone stay on the radio." "Unit 2, ready to go," Gary said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. He was going to be towed through a blizzard with a dead engine, no heat, and no power steering. Not a fun position to be in. "Unit 3, chains are secure. Ready when you are," Thomas confirmed. I climbed back into my cab, started moving forward slowly, and watched in my mirrors as Thomas's truck began to pull Gary's. The chains went taut, and Gary's truck began to roll. So far, so good. We moved at a crawl, maybe 10 kilometers per hour, feeling our way forward through the white. I couldn't see the road ahead except for the few meters directly in front of my headlights. I was navigating by feel, by the slight difference in texture between the road surface and the shoulder, by instinct developed over 2 decades of driving in these conditions. "Lead truck to convoy. Status check. Unit 2, I'm rolling smoothly. No issues yet," Gary reported. "Unit 3, tow is holding, keeping steady speed," Thomas said. We continued on, painfully slow, the storm raging around us. 25 kilometers to go. 20, 15. Every kilometer felt like an eternity. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. My eyes burned from staring into the white. My back hurt from the tension. Then, at 14:35, with maybe 10 kilometers left, Thomas's voice came through the CB. And something was wrong. "Lead truck, this is Unit 3. I'm losing Gary." My heart jumped. "Say again?" "I'm losing him. The chains, I can feel them going slack, like the weight is dropping off." I hit the brakes, bringing my truck to a stop. "Thomas, stop now. Full stop. Gary, what's your status?" No response from Gary. "Gary, respond," I said, my voice sharp. Static, then faint and distorted. I don't know. Everything went dark. I can't see anything." "You're being towed by Thomas. You should be right behind him." "I know, but there's nothing there. No truck, no chains. Just white." I stared at my radio, trying to process what I was hearing. Thomas felt like he was losing the weight of Gary's truck. Gary said he couldn't see Thomas, but they were chained together. They had to be together. Thomas, you still got the chains attached? Yeah, I can feel them. But there's no weight. It's like I'm pulling nothing. Check your mirrors. Can you see Gary's lights? A long pause, then, no, I can't see anything behind me, just snow. I felt cold dread settling into my stomach. This didn't make sense. Chains don't just disappear. Trucks don't vanish into thin air. But something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Gary, I need you to give me a long horn blast. 3 seconds. Thomas, tell me if you hear it. Unit 2. Copy. Here it comes. I waited, listening. Through my own windows, even over the storm, I heard it faintly. Gary's horn. Distant but audible. Thomas, did you hear that? Negative, I didn't hear anything. That was impossible. If Gary was behind Thomas, less than 10 meters away, Thomas would hear that horn easily, but he hadn't heard it. Gary, where are you? Look around. Tell me what you see. Just snow. And, wait, I think I see lights. Not truck lights, something else. Multiple lights spread out like buildings? Buildings? What kind of buildings? I don't know. They're behind me. I thought I was facing forward, but now I'm not sure. Everything's turned around. I grabbed my door handle, about to climb out and walk back to see what was happening, but then I stopped. Something in my gut told me that would be a mistake. That if I got out of my truck in this storm, in these conditions, I might not find my way back. Thomas, I want you to slowly reel in those chains. Pull them in hand over hand. Tell me what you find. Copy, starting now. I waited, listening to the wind howl, watching the snow pile up on my windshield. Seconds ticked by. Then Thomas's voice came back, and it was shaking. They're not attached to anything. The chains just end. The hooks are still closed, still locked, but there's nothing in them, like the truck just came unhooked and disappeared. That's not possible, I said. But even as I said it, I knew we were beyond what was possible or impossible. Gary, are you still there? I asked. Static. Then, yeah, I'm here, but I don't know where here is. Those lights are getting brighter. They look like a community, buildings, lights and windows. Should I drive toward them? No, I said immediately. Don't move. Stay right where you are. We're coming to get you. How? You don't know where I am. He was right. I didn't know. But I also knew that letting him drive toward those lights, whatever they were, would be a mistake. Every instinct I had was screaming that. Gary, turn on your hazards, all your lights. Make yourself as visible as possible. Thomas, you stay right where you are. I'm going to come back, and we're going to figure this out. Copy, Thomas said. Unit 2, copy, Gary said. But his voice was getting fainter, more distant. I put my truck in park and grabbed my flashlight and emergency radio. I climbed out into the storm and immediately regretted it. The wind was ferocious, the snow blinding. I could barely see my own truck, and Thomas's was just a vague glow, maybe 20 meters behind me. I fought my way back to Thomas's truck and climbed up to his window. He rolled it down, and I could see the fear in his eyes. The chains are really not connected to anything? I shouted over the wind. He held up the end of the chain, showing me the hook. It was closed, locked in position, but empty. I don't understand how this happened. I felt him back there. I felt the weight, and then it just vanished. And you can't hear him on the radio? I hear him, but he sounds far away. Like he's on a different channel, even though we're all on the same frequency. I grabbed my own radio and keyed it. "Gary, this is Marcus. I need you to describe exactly what you see. Every detail." There was a delay, longer than there should have been, and then his voice came through faint and crackling. I'm in my truck. I can see the dashboard, the windshield. Outside, it's snowing, but lighter than before. I can see those buildings ahead, maybe 200 meters. They look real. There's smoke coming from chimneys. I can see movement in the windows. What about the road? Can you see the road? No, there's no road. I'm sitting on ice, I think, flat white in all directions except for those buildings. My mind raced, trying to understand. We'd been on solid ground, not ice. The community of Tuktoyaktuk was still 10 kilometers ahead. There shouldn't be any buildings where Gary was describing. "Gary, I need you to check your GPS. Tell me your coordinates." Another delay. Then, "GPS isn't working. It says no signal." "What about your compass? Which direction are the buildings?" "North. They're north of me." That made no sense. We'd been heading north. If Gary had somehow gotten turned around, the buildings should be behind him, not ahead of him. Unless he was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that wasn't on any map. "Thomas," I said, turning to the younger driver, "have you ever heard of anything like this? Trucks disappearing? Drivers getting lost even though they're supposed to be right next to someone?" He shook his head, but there was recognition in his eyes. "Not personally, but I've heard stories. Old-timers talk about it sometimes when they've had a few beers and the roads come up. About drivers who went missing on the ice roads, who were never found even though search parties went out immediately. About trucks that showed up days later in places they couldn't possibly have reached. They say the ice plays tricks, that sometimes, in bad weather, reality gets thin." I didn't believe in supernatural explanations. I was a practical man, a man who dealt with mechanical problems and weather patterns and logistics. But I also couldn't explain what was happening. Gary's truck had been physically chained to Thomas's. You can't unchain a truck without someone actively unhooking the chains, and yet the chains were empty. "Gary," I said into the radio, "I need you to trust me. Don't drive toward those buildings. Don't get out of your truck. Just stay put. Keep your engine running. Keep warm. We're going to find you." "How?" His voice was getting even fainter now, like he was moving away despite being stationary. "I don't know yet, but we will. Just stay put." "Marcus, those lights, they're beautiful. They're calling to me. Maybe someone there can help." "Gary, no, listen to me. Do not go to those buildings." But even as I said it, I could hear the doubt in my own voice. What if those were real buildings? What if there was a community there that could help him? What if I was wrong? "I'm going to go check," Gary said. "Just get close enough to see, to confirm someone's there." "Gary, don't..." The radio went dead. Complete silence except for the carrier wave hiss. "Gary! Gary, respond!" I shouted into the mic, but there was nothing. Just empty static. I looked at Thomas. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "What do we do?" he asked. I stood there in the screaming wind, holding a radio that had gone silent, staring at a young driver who was looking to me for answers I didn't have. And I realized that I'd been wrong. I'd thought the hardest part of this journey would be the ice roads, the weather, the mechanical challenges. But I'd been wrong. The hardest part was this: losing someone, not knowing where they were or how to find them. Hearing their voice fade away into static and silence. "We get to Tuktoyaktuk," I said finally. "We report what happened. We get search and rescue involved, and we don't stop looking until we find him. But there's nothing we can do out here, Thomas. We can't see anything. We don't know where he is. If we wander out into that storm looking for him, we'll just get lost too. The best thing we can do is get to safety, get help, and come back with resources." He nodded slowly, but I could see he didn't like it. I didn't like it either. Everything in me wanted to stay here, to keep calling Gary on the radio, to somehow will him back into existence, but that wasn't going to help. We got back in our trucks and I led the way forward. Thomas followed, alone now, his chains coiled in the back, empty hooks swinging in the wind. We drove through the storm, slowly, carefully, covering the last 10 kilometers in near-zero visibility. And when we finally saw the lights of Tuktoyaktuk ahead, solid and real and exactly where they were supposed to be, I felt no relief. Just a hollowness in my chest, an awareness that something fundamental had gone wrong. We pulled into the community and went straight to the local RCMP station. I reported everything to the constable on duty, a young man who listened with increasing skepticism as I described what had happened. He clearly thought I was confused, that maybe the chains had failed and Gary had slid off the road, that we'd lost track of him in the storm. But I knew that wasn't what had happened. Gary hadn't slid off the road. He'd disappeared, been pulled somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't on any map, where buildings appeared in impossible places and GPS stopped working. The constable said he'd organize a search as soon as the weather cleared, which probably wouldn't be until morning. In the meantime, there was nothing to do but wait. Thomas and I got a room in the small hotel in Tuktoyaktuk. We tried to sleep, but neither of us could. We just lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside, thinking about Gary out there somewhere, lost in the white, and wondering if we'd ever see him again. Morning came slowly. The storm had blown itself out sometime around 0400, leaving behind a landscape transformed by drifted snow and an eerie, crystalline silence. The temperature had dropped again, down to -48, and the air was so still and clear you could see for kilometers in every direction. Thomas and I were at the RCMP station by 0630, along with Constable Matthews, the officer we'd reported to the night before. He'd been joined by 2 other officers who'd driven in from Inuvik overnight, along with a search and rescue coordinator named Robert Kavik, an experienced Inuvialuit tracker who knew the region better than anyone. We spread maps out on the table and went over everything again. I described the exact location where we'd been when Gary disappeared, the conditions, what he'd said on the radio about seeing buildings to his north. Robert listened carefully, asking occasional questions, his weathered face expressionless. "These buildings he saw," Robert said when I finished. He said they were north of him? That's what he said. With smoke from chimneys, lights in the windows, looked real. Robert exchanged a glance with Constable Matthews. "There's nothing north of that location. Just ice and tundra for 100 kilometers, no communities, no structures." "I know. That's what makes this so strange." "And his GPS stopped working?" "He said no signal." Robert nodded slowly. "Sometimes that happens out there, especially in bad weather. Atmospheric interference, magnetic anomalies, we don't always understand it, but buildings appearing, that's different." "You've heard of this before?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been doing search and rescue in this territory for 30 years. I've seen things that don't make sense, found people in places they couldn't have reached, had rescue beacons lead us to empty spaces. We have a phrase in Inuvialuktun, Tunigruktak. It means that which tricks you. The land, especially in winter, sometimes it tricks you, shows you things that aren't there, hides things that are. But Gary was chained to another truck, physically chained. You can't trick physics." "I know," Robert said. "That's what concerns me. If he'd just gotten lost in the storm, we'd find tracks, find evidence. But what you're describing..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "We'll go look," we'll bring equipment, radios, heat scanners. If he's out there, we'll find him." The search team assembled within the hour. 2 RCMP vehicles, Robert's truck, which was set up for search and rescue operations, and my own truck. Thomas was going to stay in Tuktoyaktuk, partly because his truck was needed here to complete the delivery of his cargo, and partly because someone needed to maintain communication in case Gary made contact somehow. We headed out at EO 800, retracing the route from the day before. The road was drifted in places, and we had to plow through some deep sections, but within an hour we reached the spot where Gary had disappeared. I recognized it by the distinctive rock formation on the left side of the road and by the disturbed snow where we'd stopped. We parked and got out. The scene was exactly as we'd left it. Thomas's tire tracks leading to where he'd stopped. The marks where I'd pulled over, and the churned up snow where we'd set up the tow chains. But no sign of Gary's truck, no tracks leading away. Nothing. Robert walked in a wide circle around the area, studying the snow, looking for any trace. The RCMP officers did the same, spreading out, checking every drift and hollow. I stood near my truck, staring at the empty space where Gary's truck should have been, trying to understand. "Marcus," Robert called out. "Come look at this." I walked over to where he was crouching, about 30 meters from the road. He pointed at the snow. "See that?" I looked, but all I saw was smooth, wind-sculpted snow. What am I looking at? The texture. See how it's different here? Smoother, like it's been compressed, and here. He moved a few meters to the right. And here. I followed his pointing finger and began to see it. A pattern in the snow, subtle but present. It looked almost like tire tracks, but they didn't lead anywhere. They were just impressions, isolated sections of track that appeared and disappeared, seemingly at random. "Like a truck was here," Robert said. "But the tracks don't connect. They're pieces, fragments." One of the RCMP officers, a woman named Sergeant Doucette, came over with a radio direction finder. "I'm picking up a faint signal," she said. "Same frequency as the CB radio the missing driver was using, but it's coming from..." She adjusted the antenna, swept it around. "North, about 2 kilometers north." "That's off the road," Constable Matthews said. "There's nothing that way." "Let's check it out," Robert decided. "Marcus, you stay with the vehicles. We'll go on foot. If we're not back in an hour, call it in." They geared up with backpacks full of emergency equipment and started hiking north, across the open tundra. I watched them until they were small figures in the distance, then climbed back into my truck to wait. The silence was profound. No wind, no sound, just the vast, empty whiteness and the enormous sky. I tried Gary's radio frequency again, calling out every few minutes, but got no response. Just that carrier wave hiss that meant the frequency was open, but nobody was transmitting. 45 minutes later, my radio crackled. It was Robert. "Marcus, we found something. You should come see this. Bring your truck, head northeast from your position, follow our tracks." I started the engine and carefully drove off the road, following the footprints they'd left in the snow. The truck handled it well, the big tires finding purchase even in the deeper sections. After about 15 minutes of slow driving, I saw them ahead, 4 figures standing in a group, looking at something on the ground. I pulled up next to them and climbed out. They were gathered around what looked like debris, scattered pieces of something. I got closer and felt my stomach drop. It was cargo. Boxes, equipment, supplies. The stuff Gary had been hauling. But not all of it, just pieces. A couple of boxes of medical supplies. One corner of what looked like a research equipment crate. Some scattered packing materials. "This was on his truck?" Sergeant Doucette asked. "Yes, that's part of his load." I examined the boxes more closely. They were intact, not damaged, just sitting there on the snow like they'd been carefully placed. But where's the rest? Where's the truck? Robert was walking in another circle, studying the area. The signal source is here somewhere. I can hear it on my receiver, but I can't locate it exactly. We spread out, searching. The sun was higher now, that weak February sun that provided light but little warmth, and in the clear air we could see far in every direction. Just empty tundra, rolling gently toward the horizon. Then Constable Matthews called out, "Over here! I found something!" We hurried to where he was standing, looking down at the snow. There was something sticking up through the surface, something dark and metallic. Robert brushed away snow, revealing more of it. It was an antenna, a CB radio antenna. We dug faster, clearing snow away, and within a few minutes had uncovered the entire roof of a truck cab. Gary's truck. But it was buried, completely buried, under at least a meter of snow, sitting on the ice-covered tundra. How? I asked, staring at it. How did it get here, and how did it get buried so fast? This snow just fell last night. I don't know, Robert said, but his face was grim. Let's get it uncovered, carefully. We worked for the next hour, using shovels from the rescue equipment, clearing snow away from the truck. Slowly, the shape emerged. It was Gary's rig, no question. Same company logo, same license plate. But it looked wrong somehow. The paint was faded, like it had been exposed to sun and wind for years. The tires were flat, the chrome was tarnished. When we finally cleared the driver's door, Robert tried the handle. It was frozen solid. He took a pry bar from his pack and worked at it, and eventually, with a crack of ice, the door opened. The cab was empty. No Gary, no personal belongings, no logbook, just an empty, frozen interior that looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. "This doesn't make sense," Sergeant Doucette said, voicing what we were all thinking. "This truck was operational yesterday. How does it look like it's been sitting here for years?" Robert climbed up into the cab, looking around carefully. He checked the ignition, the glove box under the seats. "Keys are still here," he said, holding them up. "And look at this." He pulled something from between the seats, a piece of paper, frozen stiff. He brought it out into the light and we gathered around to see. It was a note, written in what looked like Gary's handwriting. The paper was yellowed, brittle with age. The note read, "I can see the lights, they're beautiful, I'm going to them. If you find this, don't follow. Turn back. There's something wrong with this place. Time doesn't work right. I've been here for days, but also only minutes. The buildings keep moving, getting closer. I can hear voices calling my name. I know I shouldn't go, but I can't stop myself. Tell my wife I loved her. Tell my kids I'm sorry. Don't follow the lights. Don't follow. Don't..." The note ended there, the last word trailing off into an illegible scrawl. I felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. He's been here for days, but we lost him less than 24 hours ago. According to him, it's been days, Robert said quietly. According to us, it's been less than a day. What if you're both right? That's impossible. A lot of what we're seeing is impossible. He looked around at the empty tundra, at the impossibly aged truck, at the note that shouldn't exist. Something happened here, something we don't understand, and Gary walked into it. "We need to find him," I said. "I agree, but not today." Robert had looked at the sky, checking the angle of the sun. "We've got maybe 3 hours of useful daylight left. This area is bigger than we can search on foot in that time. We need to organize a proper operation. Helicopter, if possible. More personnel, heat scanning equipment." We marked the location with GPS waypoints and flags, took photographs of everything, collected the note, and a few other pieces of evidence, and then covered the truck back up to protect it from further exposure. Then, we hiked back to our vehicles and returned to Tuktoyaktuk. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. A helicopter was brought in from Inuvik. Teams of searchers combed the area around where we'd found the truck. They found more pieces of cargo scattered across a kilometer of tundra, but no more signs of Gary. No footprints, no tracks, nothing. The investigation expanded. The RCMP brought in specialists, people who dealt with unusual disappearances. They interviewed me and Thomas repeatedly, going over every detail. They examined the chains that had held Gary's truck, looking for signs of failure or tampering. They found nothing. The chains had been intact when Thomas pulled them in. They'd simply been attached to nothing. On the 4th day, I was sitting in the hotel in Tuktoyaktuk when Thomas knocked on my door. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days, which he probably hadn't. "They found something," he said. "Robert wants us to come to the search headquarters." We drove over to the community hall, which had been converted into the search operations center. Inside, Robert was standing at a table covered in maps and printouts, along with Sergeant Doucette and a man I hadn't met before, older, with gray hair and sharp eyes. "This is Dr. Peter Aaltonen," Robert said, introducing the stranger. "He's a specialist in unusual phenomena. He flew in from Edmonton yesterday." Dr. Aaltonen shook our hands. "I understand you've both had a very difficult experience," he said, his accent revealing Finnish origins. "I'd like to show you something, if you don't mind." He pulled out a tablet computer and brought up a map. "This is the area where Mr. Henson disappeared. And these," he tapped the screen, bringing up a series of markers. "These are other disappearances that have occurred in the same general region over the past 30 years. There were dozens of markers, dozens. Some of these are probably normal cases," Dr. Aaltonen continued. "People who got lost in storms, had accidents, made mistakes, but some of them are anomalous. People who vanished without trace despite immediate search efforts. People whose vehicles were found in impossible locations. People who..." He paused. "People who reported seeing lights before they disappeared." "Gary saw lights," I said. "He told me he was going toward them." "I know. I've read the transcript of your radio conversation, and I've read the note you found. Mr. Thorne, Mr. Brightwell, I need to ask you both something. When you were out there during that storm, did either of you see anything unusual? Lights, shapes, anything that didn't seem quite right?" Thomas and I looked at each other. I thought back to that drive, to the whiteout, to the feeling of disorientation I'd had several times. Had I seen anything? I wasn't sure. "I saw something," Thomas said quietly. "Right before Gary disappeared, I saw... It was in my mirror, just for a second. Lights, but not like truck lights. More like aurora lights. But low, on the ground, moving. I thought it was just a reflection or my eyes playing tricks. Where were these lights? Behind me. Where Gary's truck was, or where it should have been." Dr. Aaltonen nodded, like this confirmed something. "I've been studying these disappearances for years. There's a pattern. They always happen during storms, during periods of extreme cold, in areas where the magnetic field is unstable. And witnesses, when there are witnesses, often report lights. Not regular lights. Aurora-like phenomena, but behaving in ways the aurora doesn't normally behave." "What are they?" I asked. He spread his hands. "I don't know. Nobody knows. Some researchers think it's a natural phenomenon we don't understand yet, some kind of interaction between the magnetic field and atmospheric conditions. Others think..." He trailed off. "Think what?" Thomas pressed. Others think it's something else. Something that exists in the spaces between normal reality. Something that becomes accessible when conditions are right, when the boundaries are thin. I wanted to call it nonsense, wanted to dismiss it as superstition and pseudoscience. But I'd seen the evidence. I'd seen an intact truck chain attached to nothing. I'd seen a truck that had aged years in less than a day. I'd read a note from a man who said he'd been lost for days, even though we'd only lost contact with him hours before. "Can we get him back?" I asked. "If he's wherever he is, can we reach him?" Dr. Altonen's expression was sympathetic but not hopeful. In 30 years of documented cases, no one who's walked toward those lights has ever come back. "I'm sorry." We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Robert spoke up. "The search is being suspended. We've covered every square kilometer within a 10-kilometer radius. We found no trace beyond what we discovered on the first day. The RCMP is classifying this as a disappearance pending further investigation." "That's it?" Thomas said, his voice rising. "We just give up?" "We're not giving up," Sergeant Doucette said firmly. "The case stays open. If any new evidence emerges, if anyone reports seeing Mr. Henson, we respond immediately. But we can't keep 20 people out in the field indefinitely when we have no leads." I understood the logic, but it felt wrong. Felt like we were abandoning Gary. But what else could we do? We couldn't search forever. We couldn't check every square meter of the Arctic tundra. "I want to see where his truck was found one more time," I said. "Before I leave. Just me. Just to say goodbye, I guess." Robert looked at Sergeant Doucette, who nodded. "I'll drive you out there tomorrow morning," Robert said. "Conditions are good. Should be safe." The next morning, Robert and I drove out to the site. The sun was up, such as it was, and the visibility was perfect. We parked near the flags marking the location and walked to where Gary's truck had been found, though it had been moved to Tuktoyaktuk for forensic examination. I stood there on the empty tundra, looking north toward where Gary had said the buildings were. I couldn't see anything, just endless white rolling gently to the horizon. "You think he's still out there?" I asked Robert. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've seen a lot of strange things in this territory. I believe there are places where the normal rules don't apply, where reality is thinner. My grandfather used to tell stories about them, called them threshold places, said you had to be careful around them, respect them, or they'd take you. Do you believe that?" He looked at me. "I believe that we don't understand everything about this world, and I believe that sometimes people step through doors they can't come back from." We stood there for a while longer, and then I heard it. Faint, almost inaudible, but there. A voice on the wind. Northbound. I looked at Robert. "Did you hear that?" He nodded slowly. "I heard something, but it could just be the wind." "No," I said. "That was a voice. That was the word I kept hearing on the radio during the drive. Northbound." Robert's hand moved to his radio. "We should go. Wait." I pulled out my own CB radio, one of the handheld units I'd brought from my truck. I keyed it, broadcasting on the frequency we'd been using during the convoy. Gary, if you can hear me, respond. This is Marcus. We're still looking for you." Static, wind, nothing. Then, so faint I almost missed it. "Can't come back, too far. They won't let me." My blood went cold. Gary, where are you?" "North, always north, following the lights. Beautiful lights. Can't stop." Don't follow." "Gary, we can help you. Tell us exactly where you are." "I don't know. Everywhere, nowhere. Time is wrong here. I've been walking for years, or maybe minutes." there are others, other drivers. They're all walking north, toward the lights. We can never reach them. We just keep walking. Gary. The signal cut out. I tried calling again, over and over, but there was no response. Just the empty hiss of dead air. Robert put his hand on my shoulder. We need to leave now. We got back in his truck and drove back to Tuktoyaktuk in silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Gary's voice, about what he'd said. Other drivers, all walking north. Never reaching the lights, trapped in some place where time didn't work right. The next morning, I loaded up my truck and prepared to leave. Thomas had left the day before, taking his cargo back to Inuvik, unable to stay any longer. I understood. This place was starting to feel wrong, tainted by what had happened. Before I left, I stopped by the RCMP station to say goodbye to Constable Matthews. "If you hear anything," I said, "anything at all, call me." "I will," he promised. "Drive safe, Marcus. And if you ever come through here again—" "I won't," I said. And I meant it. The drive back to Inuvik was uneventful. The weather held. The ice road was stable. It was like the territory was giving me a pass, letting me leave without incident. I should have been relieved. Instead, I just felt hollow. I delivered my cargo in Inuvik, filed my reports, and collected my pay. Then I drove to Gary's house. His wife answered the door. She'd already heard the official report, knew that he was missing, that the search had been suspended. But she looked at me with hope anyway, desperate for some piece of good news. I told her everything. About the convoy, about the storm, about how he disappeared while chained to another truck, about the note we'd found, about the final radio message. I left nothing out. When I finished, she was crying. Not the loud, dramatic crying of television, but quiet tears that rolled down her face unchecked. "Do you think he suffered?" she asked. "No," I lied. "I think whatever happened was fast. I don't think he had time to be afraid." She nodded, wanting to believe it. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for telling me. The official reports, they don't tell you anything real, just facts and dates. But you were there, you heard him. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. You tried. That's more than most people would have done." I left her house and got back in my truck. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, before finally starting the engine and beginning the long drive south. 3 months passed. Spring arrived, though spring in the Arctic is barely distinguishable from winter. The temperatures climbed to the still frozen range, the days grew longer, and the snow began its slow retreat. I'd taken jobs in Alberta and British Columbia, staying far away from the north. I told myself it was about weather, about wanting easier routes. But I knew the truth. I was afraid of what I'd seen, of what had happened to Gary, of the voices on the radio that called out northbound like a summons. Then, one evening in early May, I got a call from Thomas. "Marcus, it's Thomas Brightwell from the convoy. Can we talk?" I pulled over at a rest stop and called him back. "Thomas, how are you?" "Not great," he admitted. "I need to tell you something. Something's been happening." "What kind of something?" "I've been seeing things, hearing things. On every run I do, especially if I'm driving at night or in bad weather. Lights in my mirrors that shouldn't be there. Voices on the radio calling my name. And last week..." He paused. "Last week, I saw Gary." My hand tightened on the phone. "You saw him? Where?" "I was driving outside of Yellowknife late at night. There was a figure on the side of the road hitchhiking. I passed him, and then I looked in my mirror, and it was Gary. I'm certain it was him. Same face, same build, wearing the same parka he had on that day. I hit the brakes, got turned around, went back to where I'd seen him, but he was gone. Just empty road." "You're sure it was him?" As sure as I can be. Marcus, I think he's trying to reach us, trying to tell us something. Or something's using his image, I said, the words tasting bitter. Dr. Altonen warned about this, about how the phenomenon might try to lure people back. I know. But what if it really is him? What if he needs help? Thomas, Gary's gone. You heard the message. He said not to follow. We have to respect that. But, no. Listen to me. Whatever you're seeing, whatever you're hearing, you don't follow it. You don't investigate. You keep driving. You get to where you're going and you ignore it. Understood? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can do that. You have to. Because if you don't, you'll end up like Gary, and I can't lose another driver. We talked for a while longer, and I tried to convince him to take some time off, to see someone who could help him process what had happened. He said he'd think about it, but I could hear in his voice that he wasn't convinced. A week later, I got another call. This time, it was Robert Kavik. Marcus, we have a situation. Thomas Brightwell left Inuvik 2 days ago, heading south. He was supposed to check in at Norman Wells, but he never arrived. His GPS tracker shows him stopped on the Dempster Highway, about 60 kilometers south of Inuvik, and it hasn't moved in 18 hours. My stomach dropped. You think he went looking for Gary? I think he saw something, and I think he went after it. I'll come up. Give me 2 days, I'll be there. Marcus, you don't have to— Yes, I do. Thomas is young. He doesn't know what he's dealing with. I'm not losing another one. I loaded up my truck that night and started driving north. The trip felt surreal, like I was rewinding time, going back to a place I'd sworn I'd never return to. But I couldn't leave Thomas out there, not after what had happened to Gary. I reached Inuvik 36 hours later, having pushed through with minimal stops. Robert met me at the staging area, along with Sergeant Doucette and 2 other RCMP officers. We've got his exact location from the GPS, Robert said, showing me a map. He stopped here, just off the highway. Aerial surveillance shows his truck is intact, no signs of accident or mechanical failure, but there's no movement. No heat signature from the cab. How long since he activated his emergency beacon? He didn't. That's part of what's concerning. If he was in trouble, he should have hit the beacon, but he didn't. We drove out to the location, a convoy of 4 vehicles. The weather was good, clear, and relatively warm for May, maybe -5 Celsius. We should have been able to spot his truck from kilometers away. But as we approached the coordinates, I didn't see anything. Are we sure this is right? I asked Robert, who was driving the lead vehicle. GPS says this is it. His tracker is pinging from right here. We stopped, got out, looked around. The highway was empty. No truck, no tracks, nothing but tundra and gravel road stretching in both directions. This doesn't make sense, Sergeant Doucette said, checking her own GPS unit. His tracker is active, and it's showing him at these coordinates, but there's nothing here. One of the other officers, a younger guy named Constable Lemieux, walked out onto the tundra, scanning with a radio direction finder. I'm getting a signal, same frequency as his emergency locator. It's coming from— He adjusted the antenna. Below us? Robert knelt down and examined the ground. The permafrost is melting unevenly here. See these depressions? These could be thermokarst features, places where ice wedges have melted and created voids. You think his truck broke through? I think it's possible. But it would take extraordinary conditions. The permafrost here should be stable this time of year. We spread out, searching. And about 20 meters from the road, Constable Lemieux called out, "Found something!" We hurried over. He was standing next to a depression in the ground, maybe 3 meters across. And at the bottom of that depression, barely visible under a layer of dirt and melted vegetation, was metal, chrome, a mirror, Thomas's truck. It was sinking into the ground. How? I asked, staring at it. How is this happening? Robert shook his head. I don't know. This shouldn't be possible. The ground here is stable. There's no reason for thermokarst to form this quickly, and even if it did, a truck of that size should rest on the frozen layer below, not sink through. It's like it's being pulled down, Sergeant Doucette observed, like something underneath is drawing it in. We tried to approach closer, but the ground around the depression was unstable, threatening to give way. Robert called for specialized equipment, ground-penetrating radar, structural engineers. Within a few hours, a team arrived and set up. The radar results were impossible. According to the scans, Thomas's truck was approximately 15 meters below the surface, suspended in a void that shouldn't exist. The permafrost layers showed on the scan, solid and intact, but there was a vertical shaft through them, perfectly straight, leading down to where the truck was. It's like a tunnel, the engineer said, studying the readouts. But there's no physical evidence of a tunnel. The permafrost on either side is intact. The truck is just there, in a space that doesn't exist. They tried drilling down to it, but the drill kept hitting the permafrost layers, solid and impenetrable. They tried excavating from the side, but the ground was frozen solid. Every attempt to reach the truck failed, and inside the truck, according to the heat scanners, there was a human heat signature. Faint but present, Thomas was in there, 15 meters underground, in a space that couldn't exist, and we couldn't reach him. We need to try something different, I said. Something nobody's thought of yet. Like what? Sergeant Doucette asked. I didn't have an answer, but Dr. Altonen did. He arrived that evening, having flown in from Edmonton when he heard about the situation. He examined all the data, studied the scans, and then asked to speak with me privately. We walked away from the rest of the group out onto the tundra where we couldn't be overheard. Marcus, I need to ask you something, he said. When you were on that convoy, when Gary disappeared, you said you heard voices on the radio. The word northbound. Did you hear anything else? Any other messages? I thought back. Gary said he heard voices calling his name. Thomas said he saw lights in his mirrors. And just before Gary disappeared, Thomas mentioned seeing something like aurora lights low to the ground. Dr. Altonen nodded. And now Thomas is trapped underground, in a space that shouldn't exist. Marcus, I think this is connected. I think whatever took Gary is now taking Thomas. But in a different way, slower, maybe. Or maybe it's adapting, learning. What is it? I told you before, I don't know what it is, but I've developed a theory. There are places in the Arctic where the magnetic field is weak, unstable. And in those places, when conditions are right, the boundary between our reality and something else becomes permeable. People can slip through, or things can slip through to us. How do we stop it? I don't know if we can, but I think we might be able to reach Thomas if we're willing to take a risk. What kind of risk? He looked at me seriously. The kind where you might not come back. He explained his theory. The truck had been pulled into a threshold space, a place between realities. The only way to reach Thomas was to enter that space ourselves, and the only way to do that was to deliberately position ourselves in the same conditions that had caused the phenomenon to occur. You want me to drive out onto the ice roads during a storm? I asked. Create the conditions that led to Gary's disappearance? Not exactly. I want to be more controlled than that. We'll use the location where Gary vanished, where the phenomenon appears to be strongest. We'll monitor conditions carefully, and we'll have tether systems, ways to try to pull you back if something goes wrong. You're asking me to deliberately get caught by the same thing that took Gary. I'm asking you to try to reach a place where we can contact Thomas, where maybe we can guide him back. If we do nothing, that truck is going to continue sinking, and Thomas is going to die down there. I thought about it for a long time. Thought about Gary, lost somewhere in the white, walking toward lights he could never reach. Thought about Thomas, trapped underground in an impossible space. Thought about my 23 years of driving these roads, all the times I'd been lucky, all the close calls I'd survived. I'll do it, I said. The next 2 days were spent in preparation. Robert assembled a team, including several of his most experienced rescue personnel. Altonen brought in monitoring equipment, sensors to measure magnetic field fluctuations, atmospheric conditions, anything that might help us understand what was happening. We returned to the site where Gary had disappeared. The tundra was as empty as ever, no sign of the buried truck or the scattered cargo. But according to Dr. Altonen's instruments, the magnetic field here was highly unstable, fluctuating in ways that shouldn't be possible. They set up a base camp, including a large heated tent, communication equipment, and emergency supplies. Then they attached tether cables to my truck, heavy-duty lines that connected to winches on 2 support vehicles. The idea was that if I started to disappear the way Gary had, they could pull me back before I was completely gone. The weather forecast called for a storm to move through that evening, conditions similar to what we'd experienced during the convoy. It was now or never. At 1800 hours, the wind began to pick up. At 1830, snow started falling. By 1900, we were in near whiteout conditions, the exact scenario we'd been waiting for. "Marcus, you ready?" Robert asked over the radio. I looked at the controls of my truck, at the swirling snow outside, at the tether cables attached to my rear bumper. As ready as I'll ever be. "Remember the plan. You drive north, slowly. We'll monitor your GPS position. If you start to phase out, if your signal begins to degrade, we pull you back, and if you see anything at all, you report it immediately. Understood?" I put the truck in gear and started forward, creeping along at maybe 5 kilometers per hour. The snow was thick, visibility was terrible, but I could see the glow of the support vehicle's lights behind me, reassuring me that I was still connected to the real world. I drove for maybe 3 minutes, covering less than 300 meters. The tethers were still tight, the GPS was still tracking. Everything was normal. Then the radio crackled. "Northbound." My heart jumped. "I'm hearing it, the voice, same as before." "Copy that," Dr. Altonen responded. "Continue forward. We're monitoring all parameters." I kept driving. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Northbound, turn here. Turn where?" There was nothing but white. But then I saw them. Lights. Not the support vehicle lights behind me, but new lights ahead. Faint, greenish, pulsing like the aurora, but at ground level. "I see lights," I reported. "Dead ahead, maybe 50 meters. They look like aurora lights, but they're on the ground." Gary saw similar lights, Robert said over the radio. "Do not approach them directly. Try to maintain distance." But the lights were moving toward me, or maybe I was moving toward them. It was hard to tell. The boundary between motion and stillness seemed to blur. Then the temperature dropped. I watched my dashboard thermometer plunge from -15 to -40, then -60, then into readings that shouldn't be possible. -90, -100. "Temperature's dropping," I said, my breath fogging despite the heater running full blast. "Dropping fast." "Your GPS signal is degrading," Dr. Altonen reported. "You're starting to phase. We need to pull you back." "Not yet. I need to get closer to those lights. If there's a way to reach Thomas, it's through there. "Marcus, this is too dangerous. I'm going in." I drove toward the lights, and as I got closer, the world around me changed. The snow stopped falling. The wind stopped blowing. Everything became still, frozen in a moment that stretched like taffy. And then I was through. On the other side, the landscape was different. Still Arctic, still frozen, but wrong somehow. The colors were off, the shadows fell in directions that didn't match the sun's position, and the sky was a shade of purple-black I'd never seen before. "Can anyone hear me?" I said into the radio. Static, pure static. The tethers were still attached to my truck. I could see them trailing behind me, but when I looked back, they disappeared into a wall of white fog that marked the boundary I'd crossed. I drove forward slowly, scanning the strange landscape. And then I saw them. Figures, walking across the tundra. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all heading north. They moved in lockstep, not quite marching, but with a synchronization that was unnatural. I stopped the truck and grabbed my binoculars. Through them, I could make out details. They were people. Men and women, wearing various clothing from different eras. Some wore modern cold-weather gear. Others wore older styles, parkas from the 50s and 60s. A few were in even older clothing, furs and traditional garments. Drivers, lost drivers like Dr. Altonen had theorized. All of them walking north toward something I couldn't see. I scanned across the line of walking figures, and then I saw him, Gary. Still wearing his parka, still moving north, his face blank and expressionless. I grabbed the CB mic. Gary Henson, can you hear me?" He didn't react, just kept walking. I climbed out of the truck, the cold hitting me like a wall, and ran toward him. "Gary, it's Marcus. Stop." I got within 10 meters of him, close enough to see his face clearly. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something in the distance. His lips were moving, and I could hear him whispering, "North, always north. The lights. Beautiful lights. Gary, you need to stop. You need to come back with me." He didn't acknowledge my presence, just kept walking. I reached out to grab his arm, but my hand passed through him like he was made of smoke. He wasn't fully here. None of them were. They were caught between worlds, trapped in this place, walking forever toward something they would never reach. I heard an engine. Turning, I saw another truck approaching, also from the direction of the boundary. It pulled up next to mine, and the door opened. Thomas climbed out. "Marcus, what are you doing here? I came to get you. Your truck sank into the ground. You've been trapped. We need to get you out." He looked confused. "I haven't been trapped. I've been driving. I've been following them." He pointed at the walking figures. "They know where they're going. They're heading toward something important. Thomas, no. They're lost. They've been lost for decades, some of them. We need to leave now." "But Gary's there. Don't you see him? We can catch up to him. We can bring him back." I grabbed Thomas's shoulders, forcing him to look at me. "He's gone, Thomas. He's not really here. None of them are. They're just echoes, trapped in this place. If you stay, you'll become like them." "How do you know? Maybe they know something we don't. Maybe they found something." I could see the confusion in his eyes, the pull of whatever force had brought him here. The phenomenon was working on him, trying to keep him. "Thomas, listen to me. Your truck is sinking 15 meters underground in the real world. If we don't leave now, you'll die. You'll be trapped here forever." He blinked, and for a moment clarity returned to his eyes. 15 meters? That's not possible. None of this is possible. But it's happening. Now come on. We need to get back to the boundary before it closes. I pulled him toward my truck, and he followed. though I could feel resistance, like he was walking against an invisible current. We climbed into the cab, and I threw it in reverse, backing up toward where I'd come from. The wall of white fog was still there, but it was smaller now, shrinking. We were running out of time. "Hold on," I said, and hit the gas. We plunged into the fog, and everything went white. I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't tell which direction was up. The tether cables went taut, and I felt the truck being pulled, dragged backward through the boundary. Then, with a jarring thump, we were through. Back in the real world, in the storm, with the support vehicle's lights visible behind us. "We've got them!" I heard Robert shout over the radio. "Pulling them back!" The winches engaged, and my truck was dragged backward through the snow, away from the boundary. Thomas was sitting next to me, looking dazed and confused, like he'd just woken from a dream. We were pulled all the way back to the base camp, and the moment we were clear, the support crews swarmed the truck. They opened my door, checked us over, confirmed we were both alive and intact. Thomas was taken to the heated tent, wrapped in blankets, given hot fluids. I sat in my truck for a while longer, staring at the storm, at the place where I'd crossed through. The lights were gone now. The boundary had closed. Whatever window had opened was shut again. Dr. Aaltonen climbed into my cab, carrying monitoring equipment. "You were gone for 8 minutes," he said. "But according to your GPS log, you drove for 43 kilometers. That's impossible at the speed you were moving." "Everything about this is impossible," I said. "But I saw them. Dr. Aaltonen, there are hundreds of people there, trapped, walking forever. Did you see Gary?" "I saw him, but he wasn't really there. None of them were. They're like ghosts or echoes, caught in that place, repeating the same journey over and over." Dr. Aaltonen was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Thank you for bringing Thomas back. Not many people would have made that choice, knowing the risks." "We don't leave people behind," I said. "That's the code." We returned to Inuvik that night. Thomas was hospitalized for observation, though physically he was fine. Mentally, he was struggling, trying to process what had happened, what he'd seen. His truck was never recovered. The ground eventually sealed over it, the permafrost reforming, hiding it 15 meters down where it would probably remain forever. The RCMP closed the investigation into Gary's disappearance, classifying it as a death due to unknown causes in extreme weather. His wife received the official notification, along with his personal effects that had been recovered from the truck. I attended the memorial service 2 weeks later, standing in the back, listening to people talk about a man I'd briefly known, a good man who'd been taken by something we couldn't explain. Thomas recovered, physically at least, but he never drove in the north again. He moved south, took jobs in the lower provinces, and as far as I know, he never talked about what happened except in the briefest terms. As for me, I kept driving, took contracts in the Arctic, ran the ice roads when they opened, delivered cargo to the most remote communities in Canada. People asked me why, after what happened, I kept going back. I told them it was because I knew the roads, knew the risks. But that wasn't the whole truth. The truth was that I'd seen something out there. Something that took people, that trapped them in a place between worlds. And I felt like I had a responsibility to watch for it, to warn other drivers, to be ready if it ever opened again. Because Gary was still out there, somewhere, walking north toward lights he would never reach. And maybe, someday, I'd find a way to bring him home. 2 years passed. 2 years of normal runs, of careful driving, of watching for signs that never came. The phenomenon, whatever it was, seemed to have closed. No new disappearances were reported. No more drivers vanished from ice roads during storms. It was like the door had shut, and whatever was on the other side had lost interest in our world. But I never forgot. Every time I drove through that region, I watched the horizon, checked my instruments, listened to the radio static for voices that shouldn't be there. It was late February, almost exactly 2 years after the convoy, when I got a call from Robert Kavik. "Marcus, I need you to come to Inuvik. Something's happened." "What kind of something?" "I can't explain over the phone, but it involves Gary. You need to see this." I drove up the next day, making the trip in record time despite the winter conditions. Robert met me at the RCMP station and his face was grave. 3 days ago, a hunter found something on the tundra, about 10 kilometers from where we lost Gary. He called it in, and we went to investigate. "What was it?" Robert pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. A figure, standing upright in the snow, perfectly preserved by the extreme cold. A man wearing a parka. "Gary. He's frozen," Robert said. "Has been for a while, probably since shortly after he disappeared. But here's what's strange. The hunter said he found him like this, standing upright, eyes open, facing north. Not collapsed, not lying down, just standing there. How is that possible? It's not. Nobody freezes to death standing up. You lose consciousness first, you fall, you curl up trying to preserve heat. But Gary was standing, and when we examined the scene, we found footprints leading up to where he was standing. Footprints that matched his boots. They came from the south, from the direction of where his truck was found, and they led directly to where he was standing. Then they stopped. He walked there? According to the physical evidence, yes. He walked approximately 40 kilometers across open tundra in a blizzard, in temperatures below -60, and then he stopped and stood there until he froze. That should have taken days, but we only lost contact with him for a few hours. "The time dilation," I said. "Like what Dr. Aaltonen theorized. He experienced days or weeks while we only experienced hours. That's our working theory, but there's more." Robert showed me another photograph. This one was a close-up of Gary's face. His eyes were open, staring ahead, and his expression was calm, almost peaceful, and written in frost across his face, formed by frozen condensation from his final breaths, were words. "Don't follow the lights." The same message from the note we'd found in his truck. The same warning he'd given over the radio. In his final moments, with the last of his strength, he'd tried to warn anyone who might find him. "We brought him back to Inuvik," Robert said. "Gave him a proper funeral. His wife was there, his kids. They finally got closure. But I thought you should know." "Thank you," I said, "for calling me." We talked for a while longer, and then Robert said something that made me pause. We found something else, in his parka pocket. A CB radio, battery long dead. But before it died, it recorded audio. We were able to recover some of it. He pulled out a small digital recorder and hit play. What I heard chilled me more than anything else I'd experienced in all of this. It was Gary's voice, talking to himself, describing what he saw. The recording was fractured, pieces of audio separated by static and silence, but what came through was terrifying. "Walking for 3 days now, feet are numb, can't feel anything, but I have to keep going. The lights are ahead. They're calling me." Static. "Passed someone today, another driver. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. He didn't respond when I called out, just kept walking." Static. "I think I was wrong. The lights aren't getting closer. We're walking in circles. I can see our footprints. We've passed this spot before, days ago, but they're still ahead of us." Static. Realized something. We're not in the real world anymore. Or we are, but it's different. Time moves differently here. I've been walking for weeks, but my watch says it's only been 6 hours. How is that possible? Static. Others are starting to realize too. Some of them are stopping, trying to turn back, but they can't find the way. The boundary is gone. We're trapped here. Static. If anyone finds this, don't follow the lights. They're beautiful, but they're a lie. There's nothing at the end, just more walking. Forever and ever. We're caught in a loop. Some of these people have been walking for decades. Static. Going to try to get back. Going to walk south. Maybe if I can get far enough from the lights, I can find the boundary again. Tell Jennifer I love her. Tell the kids I'm sorry. The recording ended there. Robert turned off the device. He tried to get back, I said. He recognized what was happening and tried to escape. And maybe he did, in a way. He made it back to our world, but the cold got him before he could reach safety. Or maybe the phenomenon let him go, I suggested. Maybe it was done with him. Or maybe he found the boundary and stepped through, but the price was that he couldn't survive the transition. Robert nodded. We'll never know for sure, but at least his family has closure. At least they know what happened to him. I stayed in Inuvik for Gary's funeral. It was a small service, attended by family, friends, and a few fellow drivers who'd known him over the years. Thomas flew up from British Columbia, looking older than his years, the experience having aged him in ways that weren't physical. After the service, Thomas and I stood outside in the cold, watching the sunset. Or rather, watching the sky grow darker, since this time of year the sun barely made it above the horizon before sinking again. "Do you still hear it?" Thomas asked. The voice on the radio. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly when I'm driving alone, late at night, in bad conditions. Just that one word, northbound. But I don't respond anymore, I just keep driving." "I dream about it," Thomas said. "About that place, about the people walking. Sometimes in the dreams, I'm walking with them and I can't stop. I just keep going north, toward lights I can never reach." "Those are just dreams." "Are they? After what we saw, how do we know what's real and what's not?" I didn't have an answer for that. We stood in silence for a while longer. Then Thomas headed back to his hotel and I to mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Gary's message, about the warning he'd tried to give. Don't follow the lights. Sound advice, but also a tragedy, because Gary had followed them. And it had cost him everything. At 0300, I gave up on sleep and went to my truck. Climbed inside, started the engine, let it warm up. The radio was on, tuned to the convoy frequency from habit. Static hissed through the speaker. Then, cutting through the white noise, northbound. I stared at the radio. It had been months since I'd heard that voice. I grabbed the mic. "This is Unit 47. Identify yourself." Static, then, "Marcus Thorne, you came for me. You crossed the boundary." It wasn't Gary's voice. It was different, older, rougher. One of the others, maybe. One of the lost drivers I'd seen walking in that place. "Who are you?" I asked. "David Moore. Been walking since 1987. Lost on the ice road in a storm, never made it home. 36 years ago. What do you want?" "To warn you. The boundary is weakening again. The storms are coming. More will be taken. You need to warn them. Tell the drivers. Don't follow the lights. Don't follow the voices. No matter what they promise, no matter how beautiful they seem, there's nothing at the end but walking. Forever. How do I stop it? How do I prevent others from being taken?" "You can't. It's part of the land now, part of the North. It takes what it wants." All you can do is warn people. Give them a chance to choose differently than we did. David, is there any way to help you? To bring you back? A long pause, then, we're too far gone. Been walking too long. We're part of this place now. But you still have a choice. You can stay away. You can avoid the storms, the ice roads, the places where the boundary is thin. You can be safe. But I won't, I said, because someone needs to watch. Someone needs to warn the others. Then you're braver than I was, or more foolish. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. The signal faded, dissolved back into static. I tried calling out again, but there was no response. David Moore, whoever he had been, was gone. Back to walking, back to that place between worlds where time moved differently, and the lights always beckoned from just beyond reach. I sat in my truck until dawn, thinking about everything that had happened, about Gary, about Thomas, about all the drivers who'd been lost over the years, about the phenomenon that took them, that trapped them in a loop they couldn't escape. And I made a decision. I would keep driving, keep watching, keep warning anyone who would listen, because someone had to. Someone had to be the voice that said, "Don't follow," even though most people wouldn't listen, even though the lights were beautiful and the voices were compelling. Over the next few months, I spread the word, talked to other drivers at truck stops, shared Gary's story, warned about the dangers of the ice roads during storms. Some people listened. Others thought I was crazy. But I kept trying because I knew the truth. The phenomenon was still out there, still taking people, and it would continue to take people as long as the Arctic existed, as long as there were storms and darkness and places where reality grew thin. But maybe, just maybe, I could save a few, could give them the warning that Gary never got, could help them choose differently. It was late March when I got my last call from Robert Kavik. "Marcus, I thought you'd want to know. We closed the investigation officially. Gary's case is resolved. Thomas has been cleared of any wrongdoing. It's over." "Is it?" I asked. Robert was quiet for a moment. "No, probably not, but officially it is. That's the best we can do." "Thank you, Robert, for everything. Take care of yourself out there, Marcus, and if you ever see those lights again, I won't follow them, I promised." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up. It was time to move on, time to get back to work. I had a load waiting, a run to make, and the roads were calling. But as I climbed into my truck and started the engine, I made myself a promise. No more convoys, no more driving with others during storms. If I was going to watch for the phenomenon, if I was going to put myself at risk, I would do it alone. I wouldn't take anyone else with me, because I'd lost Gary. I'd almost lost Thomas, and I couldn't bear to lose anyone else. The sun was setting as I pulled out of Inuvik, heading south. The road stretched ahead of me, dark and empty. The radio crackled with static, and somewhere in that static, faint but present, I heard it one more time. Northbound. But this time, I didn't respond. I just kept driving, eyes on the road, hands on the wheel, heading away from the north and whatever secrets it held. Because I'd learned the most important lesson the Arctic could teach. Some lights are meant to be admired from a distance. Some voices should never be answered, and some roads, once you start down them, you can never find your way back. Gary had followed the lights and paid the ultimate price. Thomas had almost joined him. David Moore and hundreds of others were still out there, trapped in that place, walking forever. But I was free. I'd crossed the boundary and returned. I'd seen what waited in that place between worlds, and I'd chosen to leave. And that choice, more than anything else, was what separated me from them. I drove through the night, putting kilometers between myself and the north. The storms stayed behind me, the darkness receded, and slowly, gradually, the temperature climbed. By dawn, I was in warmer territory where the sun actually rose and set properly, where reality felt solid and unambiguous, where the lights in the sky stayed where they belonged. And I kept driving, because that's what truckers do. We deliver our loads, we make our schedules, we keep the world moving, even when the world sometimes shows us things we can't explain. But every winter, when the storms come and the ice roads open, I think about Gary, about Thomas, about all the drivers who've been lost to the north. And I remember the warning: don't follow the lights, don't answer the voices, and never, ever believe that beauty and truth are the same thing. Because in the Arctic, in the darkness, in the storms, beauty is just another way to die, and the lights are always waiting, always calling, always promising something they can never deliver. Northbound. But I won't answer, not anymore.